elderly youth demographic, including 18 to 24-year-olds who wear suspenders and bow ties to class every day. I'm joined by Republican strategist Rob Powell. These are pretty encouraging numbers for the GOP, aren't they?
Yeah, of course, it's very encouraging. Millennials who look like they're permanently dressed for boat trips are a rapidly growing segment of the population.
And according to the survey, the prematurely aged are also very politically active.
Absolutely. Only about 20% of young people vote overall, but there's almost 100% turnout among youth that dress like a dad from a 1950s sitcom.
Now, what about the criticism that the GOP only appeals to white men?
Not true. We also have a lot of support among sorority girls that wear pantsuits and pearls, paunchy Chinese college students, and we're making inroads among African American ham radio enthusiasts.
This is the Onion News Network.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com.
It's Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live.
I'm Gardner Goldsmith, and now we get to dive into a special interview with researcher Chris Graves on the Salem witch trials, legends, and more. It is time, and we're going to go straight into the mind meld with Chris Graves. He's joining us on the program now, and he is, I like the avatar image, Chris. That's awesome. Chris has the picture of the Taunton, is it the Taunton Triangle? What do they call that, Chris?
Well, yeah, it's the Bridgewater Triangle, and right now my computer is telling me the reason why my camera's not hooked up right now is I have to restart it.
Oh, okay. So which would you...
Couldn't be at the worst moment either.
Well, no, I actually was watching somebody else just a little while ago, and they had to restart their computer or something like that. Do you want to restart it, or do you want to go voice? Your preference.
Oh, cool. I can do voice. Yeah, we have the articles and everything. Yeah, I didn't want to miss this for the world, believe me.
Oh, great, man. And it is kind of cool because I want to put you up a little bit bigger in the screen because I want to see you talk and see that thing vibrate like something from a sci-fi movie. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
it's like something from a video game. Chris Graves is awesome. I want to show you, Chris, I'm going to put myself in the image real quick because I want to show everybody your Rumble page. Okay, so now we're going to go back and show Chris's Rumble page, Digging with Chris Graves. Sign up over there, everybody. Chris has so many angles, so many different types of things that he covers. And, of course, there is his handsome mug with the glasses and the beard and the hat, and he's looking cool, along with the great Don Jeffries. Don, boy, I don't know, Chris, if you got to see Don's chat with David Beto about FDR from Friday.
Oh, I was in there. Yeah, I was handing out. Peter Seakosh was really excited too because he's Don's better researcher, in my opinion, and he knows all about the FDR stuff. So that was a big deal for Peter.
Oh yeah, the criminal mind of FDR, and if you read some of Amity Schle's stuff, the opening of her book, The Forgotten Man, about FDR and what a master he became at gaming the system and using the carrot and stick approach of showering funds on special interests, but promising that they would get the funds, but waiting to give it to them until they gave him political support. Then they'd get the money. This vast expansion of the welfare game, that's excellent. But it opens with guys on a train talking about how Stalin was making the trains run on time and how much they admired Stalin. Virtually everybody in the Roosevelt administration knew, including Roosevelt, that Stalin was a bloodthirsty madman. And yet they adored the guy. Just absolutely. I mean, talk about and that sort of perversion. You know, Chris, it's weird because we think about these historical figures, and we think about the fact that they could actually associate and distance that reality.
Yeah.
Meeting and smoking cigars with Winston Churchill, knowing what Winston Churchill had already been responsible for doing, and knowing that you had secretly been in touch with Churchill to say, "I will," and literally, I'm quoting verbatim, "I will do anything I can to get the United States into the war." After Roosevelt had run as a peace candidate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It is just, and so I mean. You know, we see these people on television. Sometimes we meet these weird culprits in our lives who are pathological or sociological or so narcissistic. You're just like, well, I'm going to get away from that guy. And maybe you hear something about them later where they did something stupid in their life or their business, or maybe something even worse, right? But this is systematized on such a broad scale through the political machine that it becomes almost like it's. You know, it's like you're inculcated to just expect it. These are ghouls. They're monstrous things.
It's the acceptable reality.
Yeah, it sure is. Actually, and I didn't mean that to be a segue, but I wanna show the audience a little bit of something that I sent over to you.
Yeah,
and it describes what is going to be sort of the starting subject for us tonight, which I think people will really enjoy. And it's about the witch trials. Now, as you know, Chris, and I've mentioned this on the show before, it's funny that when I was showing that witch down in Pennsylvania, they had the picture of my friends Kelly Owen and Bob Ford, because Kelly Owen and Bob Ford, they're also in the Horror Writers Association, and they're also friends with both of the people who wrote this book about the witch hunts.
Right.
And well, one of them's passed away, my friend Rocky Wood. So just to let everybody know, you know, my last name is Goldsmith. It's not Jewish, it's English and Irish. The Goldsmiths came over, I don't know when, but my middle name is Gardner, and that's from the Gardner family. There was this guy, Richard Gardner, who came over, Richard Gardner, who came over on the Mayflower, signed the Mayflower Compact. And the Gardner family, along with 4 other families, went north from Plymouth Plantation, because Plymouth Plantation, and Chris, you're probably aware of this, they actually would expel people who were not strict enough Calvinists.
That's right.
Yeah, and so whether that was the reason, or they just thought it was a good opportunity to find land on the coastline where they could start fishing and doing things like that, I don't know. But the Gardner family helped found Salem, and they were one of the founding families there. So that's Isabella Stewart Gardner, married into that family. That's where you get the Gardner Museum in Boston. And we talked to Toby Leary. I was not even aware until I heard it like the second time. They have a Gardner room or something, chamber in the State House in Massachusetts.
So your family must have settled Gardner, Mass, too.
Yeah, it's Gardner, Mass, where they do a lot of the furniture stuff. Yeah, and like Winchendon furniture and everything. Great furniture. Yeah, exactly, dude, exactly. And I don't know what river they were using for the mills. Be interested to find out the history of that. It's a very pretty area too. Yeah. So
especially nowadays with the foliage and everything, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, you know where I would love to go is out on the Mohawk Trail.
Yes.
You know, heading west towards Tanglewood. Wow, man, it's so nice. And by the way,
years prior, I would drive up to Bangor, you know, just to see Mr. Stephen King's mansion there. And had all the foliage up 95, Route 95 there.
Oh man, I love that whole route. In fact, it's funny you should bring it up, because right here, that's a picture of Rocky. And that's Stephen King. Rocky and Stephen were very good friends. He did a bunch of nonfiction publications about Stephen King's stuff. Wow. And so Rocky was a great friend with Stephen King. And Rocky is was a libertarian from Australia. And yet he was super close friends with Stephen King. Another pro-liberty guy is the editor of Cemetery Dance magazine, Richard Chismar. And he and Stephen King have been friends for a long, long time. And so, you know, I often have a lot of mixed feelings about what Stephen King might say here or there. I know his son, and I know his son Joe, and they're nice guys.
So
they're
Joe Hill personally.
Oh yeah. I gave last time I saw Joe, I gave him a copy of Genesis of the Daleks in the Barnes and Noble in Nashua.
Yeah,
he was there speaking and stuff like that. We're acquainted. We're not like super friendly. He lives out on the seacoast of New Hampshire.
yeah,
and phenomenal writer. Just great writing. But again, left of center, left wing. But we have some commonalities, and they're nice guys. They're nice people. Rocky was just an amazing dude. And as I mentioned, he and my friend Lisa Morton wrote this book on the witch hunts. And so that's sort of our topic, because it is weird to have a family tied to these things. I've just heard that in Massachusetts now, there's an ex post facto attempt to try to clear the names of the people who have been tried. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's talk about the witch trials and the witch hunts. And we'll start it off with this image. There's Stephen King and Rocky again. This is Witch Hunts, A Graphic History of the Burning Times by Rocky Wood. Rest in peace, Rocky. He had folks who are unaware, he got Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and he was aware of it, and he made very, very smart investments to allow him. He was the head of the Horror Writers Association, president for many years, was a terrific guy. I've got video of us out on the Brighton Pier having a great time watching the seagulls. I got a photograph of him with seagull behind him over the ocean, over the English Channel. Yeah. And it's really weird. He's gone, but he was such a peaceful, kind, fun guy. And he knew that he was going to start to degenerate. So he invested in things early on, got a tablet, got a wheelchair, and all the things that he would need. His son was there to back him up, and he continued to travel to the official Horror Writers events, continued to do things. And as I mentioned to you, Chris, the last time I saw Rocky, he was so devastated by ALS, he was still available to chat at a Horror Writers convention. And we had a great chat. We took a picture giving a fellow friend of ours the finger. And Rocky raised his finger and gave the guy the finger. It was just a joke. And the last thing he wrote to me was, "I love you."
Oh, and
that was really, really something. He was an amazing. What a great guy. And wow. I knew I was saying goodbye.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace. But Rocky, coming from a libertarian standpoint, Lisa Morton, the co-writer on it, and Greg Chapman, just to I'll see if I can enlarge this for everybody here. Sorry. Let me just do this, see if I can make it bigger. Greg Chapman is another Aussie who did the artwork, and the artwork is really, really cool in this book. It won the Bram Stoker Award in 2012 for superior achievement in graphic novel. Yeah. And it's not really a novel. It's nonfiction. And what's really interesting about it is, as I found out, there's a lot more to just the witch trials than Salem. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit, because you've got even more on this Halloween that you can tell us about the witch trials. But what's your angle as we open it up for the viewers at Rockfin, Rumble, or After the Fact, or Twitter?
Well, I've been to Gallows Hill. I'm not sure if you've ever been there. It's very haunting.
I have driven by it, but we never got out of the car.
Yeah, we got out of the car, and they have some memorials to the victims there. Whether you believe they were actually possessed by or whether you believe they're witches or not, I'm not sure. I mean, there's a couple of theories that have gone around over the years in terms of what may have caused mass hysteria, including even bread and fungus on bread.
Yeah, they thought it was like maybe yeast psychosis, yeast poisoning, and things like that. And it is very strange, because this happened to so many people. They couldn't understand why so many people would dive into such delusions.
Exactly. And, they would see what we would think of as the modern day witch, like on broomsticks, and they'd see demons and things like that.
It's Chris, it's almost as if they had a government narrative about some deadly thing that would destroy all of their towns. And they just had to act in unison and take care of it. You know what I'm saying, man?
I do. And there's a correlation that I think off the air, you and I have talked about. where you actually dove into it, where they would, accuse people of being witches, and then even werewolves, which we'll get to in a little bit, even in Europe, where they would use that as an excuse just to take someone's land.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And in fact, I'll go right over to it and show the cover again if people get the opportunity to check this out. In the research, and Rocky informed me of this, I actually did an interview with Rocky and Lisa. Rocky's voice is a little bit, his breathing is a little funky, so his voice is a little bit odd in it. But I think it's still over at my Liberty Conspiracy audios on Podomatic. And he and Lisa explained that as they started to do the research for the Witch Hunts graphic nonfiction book, and that's what it is, it's nonfiction, but it's all artwork and so on. What they discovered was that Salem was not an isolated place. This happened all over the place, all around the world. And what they found was it was political forces that were, they levered off of this spiritual fear and religious fear. And once one person in a political area found out about what somebody else was doing, they used it as a way to target people and make them give up their land. So it was a way to acquire property. It was a way to knock out people who had very valuable property. And he said, that's what really made it spread, because political forces realized it was a valuable weapon to use against people, to accuse them of witchcraft, and either they would be found guilty or their reputation would be so bad that they would have to leave, and then they would sell their land at a rock bottom price.
Very cheap, at a very, very cheap price that they were 100% ripped off on.
And they looked into the claims about, could it have been, some sort of psychosis brought on by yeast in the bread, that sort of thing. And they said, no, not that case. It was a way, and they would even pay off people to claim. Some of so like the story out of Salem, younger people making the claims as we see in the play, and they say, oh, and the Crucible and that sort of thing. Was it? Yeah, it was the Crucible, right?
Yeah, the Crucible.
Yeah. And they would pay people off. They'd be like, here's a person in a bad state. I'll give them some money. You say you saw this. You just keep sticking with it. And they were all set. And it happened over and over again. And
boom, you have your corroboration right there.
Yeah.
It was made up corroboration.
Yeah, exactly. In some cases, you'd get people who would speak up because they had been jilted by someone or something like that. It was just such an easy weapon, spreading the pathogen of witchcraft all around the place, happening in the 1600s when, of course, word was word of mouth. Yeah. And it was very easy to quietly, not leave a paper trail. You just make sure you supported somebody,
And money talks, and what walks, right?
Yeah, big time, big time. So tell us a little more about your angle as you started to look into the witch trials. You got so much fascinating stuff that you sent my way, and I'll click on anything you might want me to bring up.
Yeah, I actually have a history.com article link about before America had witch trials, Europe had werewolf trials. I'm not sure if you see that or not.
I'll go over to it here and show it on the screen, and here we go. Yes.
Yeah, so I was doing research for a werewolf movie a couple years ago, and I wanted to kind of do a different take on the werewolf genre, and I came across this whole thing about this thing I had never heard of before, where it was women werewolves. And it was tied to this phenomenon that was over in Europe about 200 years before the Salem witch trials even, where witches and werewolves would be kind of connected with accusations of being werewolves and witches, but they would be like together in a weird way. And they would go on trial, and this is like in France and Ireland, all over Europe. And it turned out that it was just people, mentally disabled people, or you actually had like beggars and vagrants and things like that, people, quote unquote, undesirables, that kind of thing. And they would be accused of mutilating and eating children, even.
Jeez.
There were probably some guilty parties, like pedophiles and actual killers, that were being labeled with this thing too, like a werewolf and such. But for the most part, it was kind of mirrors the Salem thing, where most likely they were not witches, and that's my opinion. I mean,
it's wild to think now, and we have our lycanthropy legend, this idea of you get bitten by a werewolf, and then as the moon, as the moon comes up, then that sort of thing, you go into that phase. Who is it? Robert McCammon's got a great novel called The Wolf's Hour, where in World War II, the guy's a spy in Europe, gets bitten by a werewolf and starts to turn into a werewolf. And then as he's a werewolf, he ages at a rapid rate compared to what he would normally age as a human being. Yeah. And when he comes out of it, he's really exhausted and so on. But it's a fascinating, it's a great, great story. Around the time that he came out with They Live, or They Thirst. I'm thinking of the movie.
They Thirst.
And so, and it's interesting because on this piece, we have right here, Lycaon transforms into a wolf, which is where we get lycanthropy in Greek mythology. Yeah. Lycaon, king of Arcadia, tested Zeus by serving him the roasted flesh of his son Nyctimus in order to see whether Zeus was truly omniscient. Well, that was a big mistake in a couple ways, wasn't it?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, and Chris, if you don't mind, Chris Graves is our guest, folks. I want to read the opening of this. Very interesting opening here. Some 200 years before the witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts courts in Europe were convicting men and some women of transforming into werewolves and mutilating and eating children.
Now, they don't really touch upon the witch contingent or the witch thing, but a lot of these cases weren't just werewolves. They were werewolf witch teams. It's kind of odd.
Wow. So you had this supernatural devil curse thing, but not necessarily in the tradition of the witch as we know today, or as the cult might have sung, right?
Exactly.
Okay, or as the Sonics might have sung, of course, about Hillary Clinton a couple decades before.
Yeah,
she's the witch.
I can believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. I think in that interview that she did for 60 Minutes, where she was laughing about Gaddafi, didn't she say, "We came, we saw, I turned into a wolf, he died"? Is that what she said?
Yeah, something about that. And
then she was like,
yeah, she cackled, and then a house fell on her, and then
I don't think we don't need that kind of supernatural to know that she's an evil creature, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you say, as you mentioned, the punishments were sometimes as gruesome as the alleged crimes. In Germany in 1589, executioners strapped accused werewolf Peter Strump to a cartwheel, removed his skin with hot pincers, and chopped off his head before burning his body at the stake. Stump's head, no pun intended, attached to a wooden pole carved into the likeness of a wolf, was later displayed as a warning to others tempted to consort with the devil.
Yeah, that's not a timeshare that I would sign up for.
We'll return with more from the great Chris Graves here on Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Thanks for listening, and find Liberty Conspiracy live at 6 p.m. Monday through Friday on Rumble and Rockfin. You can listen live or after the fact.
So the protection of life, liberty, and property is what the Free State Project is all about. But it's an effort to move 20,000 people who understand.
It's about demonstrating to the entire country
that, we can have a free market, a truly free market.
Making it just a freer, great place to live.
It's the world's largest voluntarist libertarian community, and it's only getting bigger.
That's amazing, to be able to move to a place where other people passionately believe in being free and independent.
What the Free State Project is managing to do, though, is to put their money where their mouth is. Physically getting up across the country and saying, let's go someplace and let's demonstrate the power of these ideas. There's a lot of kind of philosophy that surrounds liberty. There's a lot of thinking about it and talking about it. But here in New Hampshire, people are doing it.
101 Reasons Liberty Lives in New Hampshire, a documentary by Free State Project Early Movers. Watch it free at 101reasonsfilm.com. 101reasonsfilm.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Caroline Malone. US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are visiting the state of Maine following the most deadly gun massacre in the nation this year. 18 people were murdered and others were injured on October 25th when an Army reservist with known mental health problems attacked people apparently randomly in a bowling alley and bar. Biden is paying respects to the victims and grieving family and community members. On Air Force One on the way over, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said the president supports further action by Congress now.
The president has taken historic action over the last 2.5 years to end the gun violence epidemic tearing our nation apart. Congress has a responsibility too. They must pass on an assault weapons ban. They must enact universal background checks, require safe storage, and end immunity from liability for manufacturers. Congress has the power to ensure an event like this does not happen again. The time is now to act.
Former US President Donald Trump's son, Eric, has taken to the stand for a second day in a trial that could cripple the family business. Eric Trump has again denied any involvement in inflating financial documents to win more favourable terms from insurers and lenders. Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
Eric Trump says he's been relying on company accountants and lawyers to verify the business financial documents and maintains he knew nothing. But when faced with evidence during his cross-examination, emails that showed he signed off on documents that estimated the value of properties, he continued saying he counted on others to ensure those estimates were accurate. He told the court that he does not recall many of the interactions as he was involved at times on other aspects of the business. The judge has already ruled that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the assets, and the trial is largely about what penalty they should face. Donald Trump is expected to testify on Monday, already denying any wrongdoing. Jody Jacobs, New York.
At least 5 people have died after devastating floods in central Italy. Storm Ciarán hit the country on Thursday night after leaving behind a trail of destruction in the UK, France, and other parts of Western Europe. Italy correspondent Giles Gibson has more.
The regional governor of Tuscany said it had been a long and complex night for search and rescue teams who used rubber boats to evacuate people from their homes in the pitch black. As dawn arrived, revealing the extent of the damage from the rising waters, local authorities also declared a state of emergency. In a statement, the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed her deep condolences for the victims' families and said she's keeping in constant touch with local authorities and emergency teams on the ground. Giles Gibson, Rome.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSA.
Don't miss a moment of Free Talk Live. Get our archives daily via our podcast at feeds.freetalklive.com.
We continue on Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live, digging into legends, lore, and mysterious crimes with guest Chris Graves. I'm Gardner Goldsmith. Thanks for tuning in. And I had no idea that the werewolf lycanthropy legend was that old and that well established, that they had trials like the witch trials that actually preceded the witch trials until you told me. Yeah, Chris, that's an amazing thing. And when you and I were talking about this on the phone, it blew me away because, like, oh yeah, did you know they had werewolf trials? I'm like, huh?
I only knew that because of doing research for this werewolf witch horror movie screenplay that I wanted to still do. And I was fascinated because I'm like, that isn't the basis of my werewolf screenplay, but that could be the basis for another screenplay altogether, just the backstory.
You know, that you could do a mini series all about that. That would be amazing.
I knew nothing about any of this. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the werewolf trials from the papal inquisitors to the secular courts. Like they actually put people on trial like this, right?
Yeah, through the 15th and the 16th, 17th centuries. And they would basically kind of mirror with Salem. Like, in Salem, they would literally crush people to death. And in Danvers, Mass, where a lot of the actual accusations of the witch trials themselves.
In fact, a lot of it wasn't in Salem proper. It was outside of Salem. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, and they actually, I've been down to, they have a memorial for all of the accused in Danvers. That's even bigger than the Gallows Hill one, where there's a couple of concrete stones there with, like Mary Proctor and people's names like that, and how they died and everything. But in Danvers, they have all the people that were, thrown in the water, and drowned, because that was the idea. If they didn't drown, then, they're witches. So they were damned if they do, damned if they don't, as they would say,
Well, how does that tie into... and they absolutely were. It's like the Monty Python skit. It's like, we'll throw in the water.
It's like you're going to drown, and you're not. There's no winning here.
Yeah. If you drown, we knew you weren't a witch because you would have saved yourself. All right, good stuff.
You're dead, so it doesn't matter. So you're not going to care, I guess.
Yeah, you're totally cool. Now it's interesting because you have the werewolf stuff preceding this by 200 years, and you've got the story. In Europe, exactly, and it goes all the way to the Pope. And I'll just mention this real quick as we start to go into the witches. And then there's another facet of it that you brought up, and I didn't know about this either. Yeah. In 1521, inquisitors appointed by the Pope presided over several trials of alleged werewolfery. Two shepherds, Pierre Bugeaud and Michel Verdun, confessed to making a pact with the devil in exchange for food, meeting with a man in black who gave them an ointment that turned them into werewolves, then attending midnight witch gatherings and hunting and eating children. Both were convicted and burned at the stake, along with a third who refused to confess. Now, I'm not sure, but I think he held his hand up. The number was 14, and his nickname was Skippy, but I'm not sure. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
You never know.
But yeah. And they hung out with an artist who does spirit cooking. But anyway, yeah. So tell us a little bit about anything you want to add about the werewolf things. But then, as the Universal Monsters might do, let's talk about the vampire hunting in New England, the vampire trials, because that also is something I didn't know. But any other stuff about the werewolf stuff that you might want to mention?
It's just that, like, the punishment seemed to be even more ghastly than what some of these men and women were being accused of. I mean, mutilating and eating children is probably the worst of the worst, but they would literally, like, peel their skin back and like torture them pretty much to death.
Oh.
So, yeah, I mean,
man. Couldn't they just take him to a Taylor Swift concert with the governor of New Jersey? Isn't that torture enough?
Or Beyonce, something like that, double bill. But,
I can see it now. There's like Monty Python. Fetch the comfy chair.
That's right. Yeah, the werewolf trials, other than what we pretty much covered. And I mean, there's really nothing else besides the fact that they were not just here, because there were a couple of isolated werewolf things here too, that weren't so much in Salem, but around the country. But they definitely went into the vampire accusations in the 1800s, especially in Rhode Island, with probably the most famous case, a woman named Mercy Brown.
Brown. Let's check out the Mercy Brown thing. And I see here that according to history.com, the werewolf trials themselves continued sporadically in the 17th century in Germany.
Oh yeah.
But in Netherlands and in Eastern Europe, but eventually they sort of petered out as industrialization grew. And yet over in New England, as you say, you got Mercy Brown. I've got the click to allthat'sinteresting.com. Mercy Brown's story might be Yeah, one of the history's craziest vampire incidents. So tell us about this. And again, what's weird is it's this sort of perverse interest that you can't help but have. It's a curiosity, but these people suffered. They were killed. They were tortured. They had their land taken from them. We got 1892, Mercy Brown. Tell us a little bit about this, Chris Graves.
Well, her family, it was at the time when there was a big tuberculosis. I don't know. I hate saying pandemic, but there was a whole bunch of tuberculosis going around. What would be the proper phrase for that? That's not plandemic or pandemic or whatever, but just.
Well, it depends on the level, I suppose, of what it was. But there certainly was
they had quite a bit
of an epidemic of it. Yeah,
epidemic. That's the word. Okay, yeah.
At least within the United States. I don't. If it was across many countries and it was deadly enough, they would have called it a pandemic. But if it's just in the United States, it would have been an epidemic. And that sort of thing. But that's just, the way that they've done their terminology. And then, of course, who cares? Because the who's going to change it, right? So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and Webster's will change the definition anyway.
Yeah.
Other than that, no, I went to public school, so I needed that pointed out.
And by the way, Mercy Brown is seen as such an example by the statists of why you need to have lockdowns, why you need to isolate people. And they still do it. They still cite Mercy Brown like, oh, that evil Mercy Brown. She continued to do stuff even though she was killing people. It's like, no, what are you talking about? But anyway, continue, please. Yes.
She was dead and buried. That's the thing that people don't realize. But she suffered tuberculosis infections, and then I guess other members of her family did too. Her mother, Mary Eliza, was the first to die of the disease, and then Mary Olive, a sister, according to her gravestone. In 1891, daughter Mercy and son Edwin also contracted the disease. Friends and neighbors of the family believed that one of the dead family members was a vampire, although they did not use the name and they didn't use the vampire name and as a cause of Edwin's illness. But this was in accordance to threads of contemporary folklore, which linked multiple deaths to one family to undead activity. Consumption.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. No.
Well, I was going to say, the thing about it is that tuberculosis was pretty widely known at the time. Frederick Bastiat died of tuberculosis in the 1840s, Exactly. So it wasn't uncommon. This is in Rhode Island near the turn of the century, the 1880s, 1890s, right?
That's right. Yeah. What had happened was consumption was really poorly understood at that time, and it was the subject of a lot of superstition. And I think the Salem witch trial period was kind of under the same umbrella in a way. And I think same with the European werewolf trials, superstition played a large role in convincing the public of a lot of this stuff. I feel like, what do you think?
Oh, I think it definitely was the case. But again, I think there's also this tendency that we see today with the whole pandemic lockdown mindset of the people in political authority, the people who are seen as, the establishment people. Well, I've got the authority, so listen to what I say. And then they talk to other people, and then they keep pushing this authoritarian sort of thing where you just can't do something unless you do it their way. This tendency for authoritarianism and telling other people how to live, especially backed up with this sort of amorphous fear mongering that if you don't do it this way, well, things are going to fall apart. Just look at this woman. And they can selectively, especially back then, they would be very easy to start picking out anecdotal instances and saying, well, now, this is going to apply to you and get people fearful. Really very, very tragic. And in fact, what's interesting about this is you can see how this at the turn of the century and the early 1900s, we had the Jacobson decision in Massachusetts about the jab, saying that, the state can compel someone to get a jab. And then that led, plus another Supreme Court decision, that led to the sterilization of all sorts of women under so-called public health to remove their bad blood from the future population, because they might be seen as mentally retarded or danger or something like that. Unbelievable stuff, you know, and it's all part of this we can control sort of thing. So this mindset it seems to be universal, whatever era it is, right?
Yeah, and it's just where really crazy things can be accepted, you know, under mass hysteria. And George Brown, the father, the leader, the father of the Brown family or whatever, he was persuaded to have all the members that had died in his family have their bodies exhumed because they wanted to see if the bodies were decomposed or not. And
this is where we go to that Smithsonian link that you sent me, the Great New England Vampire Panic. So from this, was it because of the tuberculosis or other things that from this you start to get people
think in modern times that it was tuberculosis, and what had happened was they figured that his wife and his other daughter, their bodies had the proper amount of decomposition at the time, but surprisingly Mercy, she had almost no decomposition and still had blood in her heart. So that's why she got pegged as being the vampire that infected the rest of the family. So what had happened was they cut her heart out and they turned it into ash, and they actually turned it into like they mixed the ashes with water to create like a tonic, and was given to Edwin, the father, to try to cure, you know, his tuberculosis at the time. And he pretty much, it was too, he actually died 2 months later, so it didn't really work, you know, but the idea of just carving out Mercy's heart, because it had a little bit of blood left in it, and mixing the ashes from it with water would actually cure Edwin.
Wow. Let's go to this little bit here, Chris. Our guest is Chris Graves. And Chris, I want to read to the audience the opening of this Smithsonian Magazine piece. This is the Great Vampire Panic of New England. So here it is. It's originally written in October of 2012. Children playing near a hillside gravel mine found the first graves. One ran home to tell his mother, who was skeptical at first, until the boy produced a skull. Because this was Griswold, Connecticut in 1990, police initially thought the burials might be the work of a local serial killer named Michael Ross. They taped off the area as a crime scene, but the brown, decaying bones turned out to be more than a century old. The Connecticut state archaeologist Nick Bellantoni soon determined that the hillside contained a colonial-era farm cemetery. New England is full of such unmarked family plots, and the 29 burials were typical of the 1700s and early 1800s. The dead, many of them children, were laid to rest in thrifty Yankee style, in simple wood coffins without jewelry or even much clothing, their arms resting by their sides or crossed over their chests, except that is for burial number 4. Bellantoni was interested in the grave even before the excavation began. It was one of only 2 stone crypts in the cemetery, and it was partially visible from the mine face. Scraping away soil with flat-edged shovels, and then brushes and bamboo picks, the archaeologist and his team worked through several feet of earth before reaching the top of the crypt. When Bellantoni lifted the first of the large flat rocks that formed the roof, he uncovered the remains of a red-painted coffin and a pair of skeletal feet. They lay, he remembers, in perfect anatomical position. But when he raised the next stone, Bellantoni saw the rest of the individual had been completely rearranged. The skeleton had been beheaded, skull and thigh bones rested atop the ribs and vertebrae. It looked like a skull and crossbones motif, a Jolly Roger. I'd never seen anything like it, Bellantoni recalls. Subsequent analysis showed that the beheading, along with other injuries, included rib fractures, occurred roughly 5 years after death, somebody had also smashed the coffin. The other skeletons in the grave hillside were packaged for reburial, but not JB, as the 50-ish male skeleton from the 1830s came to be called, because the initials spelled out in brass tacks on it, because of the initials on his coffin lid.
Yeah.
So they shipped them to the National Museum of Health Medicine, and one colleague asked, "Ever heard of the Jewett City vampires?"
Yep.
This is absolutely fascinating. Jewett City, Connecticut, 1854. Townspeople had exhumed several corpses suspected to be vampires that were rising from their graves to kill the living.
Yeah.
A few newspaper accounts of these events survived. Had the Griswold grave been desecrated for the same reason? So,
well,
I know.
There's a little correction, just so that people, they're not like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I was crossing the streams, as they said in Ghostbusters.
I've got a story about Ghostbusters.
It was
either tonight or tomorrow, actually.
It was actually Edwin was the son and the brother of Mercy Brown. Edwin died 2 months later after having that tonic that was mixed with his sister's heart, the ashes and everything. But Father George was the only member of the family not to contract tuberculosis. But here's the other thing that's really intriguing, especially in terms of fiction.
Yeah.
There's a lot of scholars that believe Bram Stoker, besides the Vlad the Impaler, backstory of Dracula, the real life Vlad the Impaler, the other elements to his novel Dracula, a lot of scholars believe that he read newspaper articles that came over, from America about Mercy Brown for Dracula.
Well, it makes some sense. It makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. And of course, Stoker had come up with his idea for Dracula when he was a teenager.
Yeah.
And had sort of sketched out some of the things about, Harker going over and visiting and, being involved with the real estate game and things like that. And that whole idea of having a novel that includes letters.
Yeah.
Very novel in a way, that there's this whole other story that Harker is telling of his terrible experience at the castle. Absolutely fascinating. And
well,
very
it's like a story within the story. I love that.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the timing of it is pretty spot on,
Yeah, so there are scholars out there that maintain that besides Vlad the Impaler, the other component to Bram Stoker's Dracula was Exeter, Rhode Island's Mercy Brown.
Wow. Well, Chris, let me ask you this. Now, we know that if we look at stories like Edgar Allan Poe, and David Knight has mentioned this, Edgar Allan Poe's Premature Burial. Yeah. Stephen King wrote a very good story called, I think, Autopsy Room 13. We have these instances of people getting catalepsy or something like it, where they appear to be dead or unmoving, and then they awaken later.
That's where the term Saved by the Bell comes from, my friend, because they literally would have a bell attached to a string. So if someone woke up in their casket, someone would hear them and come dig them back up. Is that where you're going? I'm sorry if it was.
No, you're anticipating this perfectly. And I don't know how long that lasted, but it definitely seemed to be. Yeah. And I know that they did this sort of thing in Ireland in particular.
Yeah.
They did it in other places in Europe, and they also did it in some places in New England that I've heard, but I don't really know that much about it.
I haven't looked too far into it other than one of my favorite Alfred Hitchcock Presents episodes. And you would think it would be something right out of, Rod Serling's Twilight Zone or something.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Alfred Hitchcock Presents had an episode where a prisoner, I believe, at a jail or prison rather, faked his own death and made a pact with the prison caretaker, cemetery caretaker or whatever, that once he was able to escape after his funeral, that he would repay him somehow. And spoiler alert for a show from literally from 1951, I think. Alfred Hitchcock Presents. At the end of the episode, the guy is pulling the string because he woke up after being given whatever shot to put him to sleep or whatever for the funeral.
Yeah.
He wakes up and he lights a match, I believe, inside the coffin. And he realizes that the guy that's supposed to come and dig him up is in the coffin with him because he had a heart attack. And it's totally a Twilight Zone thing, but Alfred Hitchcock Presents was the show. So that's kind of where they were inspired by, those old time stories about people allegedly. And I believe there were a couple of cases where people were dug up. And I just don't have the articles in front of me right now. But yeah, that term, Saved by the Bell, was not just Screech and Zach Morris and all that. It wasn't just a TV show from the 80s, a goofy one. It was an actual term because people would wake up all the time after being declared dead, having fully fledged funerals, wakes, and they would wake up because it was such a deep, deep sleep.
Yeah. And of course, people would ascribe some demonic possession to this, that they are actually coming back from the dead or something, right? Yeah.
Well, there's that too. It makes it even more. How do you explain that away in those times where?
Oh yeah. And which reminds me, you talk about the Alfred Hitchcock Presents story.
Yeah.
I wonder if that inspired Richard Matheson and his son R.C. They wrote a story together called "Where There's a Will." Yeah. And I don't know if you've read it, Chris, but I won't give away the ending. Yeah. You have?
I think I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. A guy wakes up in the coffin, and at first he doesn't know where he is, and it's like there's wood all around him. And he's like, "Where am I?" And he reaches in his pocket, and he has a lighter, and he realizes where he is, and he's in a coffin, and he's
don't tell me. Is he buried with the guy that's supposed to come dig him up?
No. Oh, okay. He's all alone, but he's got to get out of there because he knows he's going to run out of oxygen. First, he freaks out, and then he realizes, wait a minute. And all he has is his lighter.
Yeah.
And he finds a way to get out of the coffin.
Oh.
And then he's trying to get back to his wife. And where there's a will is a double meaning because the guy uses his own will to get out. But then
there's a will that he left behind. Yeah.
There's a will for inheritance. Yeah.
So and then there's a relative out of the
Yes. Yeah. It's great story. It's super short.
So
and the ending.
Quentin must have taken that inspiration from that same story then for Kill Bill when she
I bet you're right. Absolutely. Yeah, just awesome stuff. Really cool. And so you're talking about you talk about Rhode Island and tuberculosis and things like that. Let's shift over into the final bit that we might want to discuss now, and I think we should open it up because it requires Lizzie Borden, the Lizzie Borden stories. There's plenty more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live coming up.
Are you about to meet the media? If you're about to be interviewed, do their homework for them. Know this about the person who will interview you. He or she is busy, so expect minimal, if any, preparation. He or she doesn't know as much about your topic as you do. He or she isn't as concerned as you are about getting your message out, so you need to take responsibility. Provide a biography and fact sheet, photographs, or other materials that tell your story. Reporters won't be put off if you supply frequently asked questions. Remember, Public Speaking 101, at the end of the speech, what's the one thing you want them to remember? You can download the document I supply to reporters who interview me and squirm through a video that demonstrates how not to conduct your media interview at www.survivalspeech.com. I'm Holland Cook.
Eleutheromania, the insatiable desire for freedom. It's the new 3-song heavy metal EP from Captain Kickass. Available now on your favorite music app or get it directly from CaptainKickass.com.
If you want to know the latest about Free Talk Live before we go on the air, all you need to decide is how you want it delivered. It's your choice. Visit news.freetalklive.com to receive our usually weekly news updates by email. Plus, we have a Twitter account at twitter.freetalklive.com, and you can follow us on the decentralized Mastodon platform at toot.freetalklive.com. So please follow us at toot.freetalklive.com and sign up for our emails at news.freetalklive.com.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 2 up next after the news, here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Caroline Malone. US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are visiting the state of Maine following the most deadly gun massacre in the nation this year. 18 people were murdered and others were injured on October 25th when an Army reservist with known mental health problems attacked people apparently randomly in a bowling alley and bar. Biden is paying respects to the victims and grieving family and community members. On Air Force One on the way over, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said the president supports further action by Congress now.
The president has taken historic action over the last 2.5 years to end the gun violence epidemic tearing our nation apart. Congress has a responsibility too. They must pass on an assault weapons ban. They must enact universal background checks, require safe storage, and end immunity from liability for manufacturers. Congress has the power to ensure an event like this does not happen again. The time is now to act.
Former US President Donald Trump's son, Eric, has taken to the stand for a second day in a trial that could cripple the family business. Eric Trump has again denied any involvement in inflating financial documents to win more favourable terms from insurers and lenders. Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
Eric Trump says he's been relying on company accountants and lawyers to verify the business financial documents and maintains he knew nothing. But when faced with evidence during his cross-examination, emails that showed he signed off on documents that estimated the value of properties, he continued saying he counted on others to ensure those estimates were accurate. He told the court that he does not recall many of the interactions as he was involved at times on other aspects of the business. The judge has already ruled that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the assets, and the trial is largely about what penalty they should face. Donald Trump is expected to testify on Monday, already denying any wrongdoing. Jody Jacobs, New York.
At least 5 people have died after devastating floods in central Italy. Storm Ciarán hit the country on Thursday night after leaving behind a trail of destruction in the UK, France and other parts of Western Europe. Italy correspondent Giles Gibson has more.
The regional governor of Tuscany said it had been a long and complex night for search and rescue teams who used rubber boats to evacuate people from their homes in the pitch black. As dawn arrived, revealing the extent of the damage from the rising waters, local authorities also declared a state of emergency. In a statement, the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed her deep condolences for the victims' families and said she's keeping in constant touch with local authorities and emergency teams on the ground. Giles Gibson, Rome.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks. Listening today to new music by The Beatles. Well, at least one track, their last ever. Unless you've been on a distant planet, you will know that Now and Then was released on Thursday. Created with the benefit of AI technology, it puts the band back together. And it's based on a ragged, partial demo of the song that John Lennon recorded in the late 70s. Oliver Murray made a documentary about the song's creation.
It's called machine audio learning, and essentially you give the software enough information that it recognizes what John's voice should sound like. I like using this term musical archaeology, brushing away the layers of the frequencies that you don't want, but trying to retain all the ones you do. The added level of care and attention that only really came into being for their Get Back series with Peter Jackson. Then there was this extra engagement with new technology where Paul asked the question, is it possible to revisit this song that we could never crack in a way that he should sound on an actual proper Beatles record?
And lo, the four were fab again. One last reminder of the Beatles' unique sound and contribution to popular music. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again. President Biden pays respects to the victims of the most deadly mass shooting in the US on a trip to Maine. Eric Trump, the son of the former president, denies all involvement in exaggerating family business values for financial gain in an ongoing New York trial. And Storm Ciarán continues to wreak havoc in Europe, killing at least 5 people in floods in Italy. There's more from us on Twitter at Feature Story. And that's the latest from Feature Story News. Caroline Malone reporting.
Delighted health insurance executives gather in an outdoor coliseum to watch a patient battle cancer. And a self-conscious flasher is fully clothed under his trench coat. This is the Onion Week in Review. While stressing that they would absolutely never consider doing anything of the sort, German leaders quietly admitted this week that they were pretty sure they could carry out another Holocaust if they ever truly wanted to. Quickly noting that the Holocaust was an atrocity that should never be repeated, no matter how easy it would be to do so, almost all members of the German parliament discreetly conceded that with their country's dominance of Eurozone GDP, pulling off the unthinkable genocide would not be the least bit difficult.
Wir können nicht zulassen. I'm just saying, hypothetically, that we very easily could do it. I mean, we definitely have the infrastructure, and the concentration camps are still standing.
In other news, a so-called Christian has an erection. A new study finds more children are growing up in single-parent households. And a real-life Nancy Drew traces the source of her HPV.
This is the Onion News Network.
We're still not sure why you'd want to watch, but our video feed is streaming nightly for free at cam.freetalklive.com.
We continue with Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live, digging into legends, lore, and mysterious crimes with Chris Graves. Let's go over right now, and I'll show people the photograph of Lizzie Borden here and all these great links you've sent over to me. And I'm going to click on one. And as you and I have discussed, I've been to the Lizzie Borden house 3 times in Fall River. And
Did you ever do the bed and breakfast? I didn't have the cojones to actually go through with it.
Yeah, I've stayed over 3 times. It's awesome. You have a typical breakfast or dinner from that era in the dining room where they had it, and it is very strange. They've got the couch laid out exactly where the murderer killed Lizzie Borden's father. And then you go up to the bedroom where her stepmother was murdered. And, you know, the people who own it, they've got it all down. They explain everything to you. And, you know, what the circumstances were like and the differences between the Protestants and the Catholics, the pro-Irish versus the pro-English, and the different areas of town where they lived, and why it seems that her father, who was pro-English, got who was murdered, of course. Why the jury seems to have acquitted her because nobody liked her father. He was a banker, and they were mostly of Irish Catholic stock, and they were seen as the downtrodden. He was the highfalutin pro-British Anglican, and they didn't like that. And so they think that's one of the reasons why she was acquitted of this murder, because the jury identified mostly with her and the fact that she resented her father greatly. The will had been changed. It was going to go to now the woman who had married her widowed father, and she didn't like that woman. But there are so a lot of the circumstantial evidence seems to indicate that she would have been the only one who really could have committed the murder, because the maid was there, but really not there. She was moving around and was seen and stuff like that. But there's other stuff that indicates, and for example, it looked like she was going to try to poison her father. She kept going to the drugstore to get strychnine, I think it was, or arsenic.
Strychnine.
And and the druggist was like, "Why are you getting this now?" She's like, "Oh, I want to take care of this. I want to put it on a cape and take care of this. But it was like mid-August. Like, why would she be dealing? But, who knows? Maybe she would want to do that. Because evidently she wanted to use it as like a deterrent for rats or something to not get into her stuff or something like that. Tell me what you think about the Lizzie Borden case. I'll click on one of these Lizzie Borden stories here, and we'll call up that image of Lizzie right there.
I tend to think, and it's not a popular opinion, but I tend to think it was Lizzie's sister and her sister's
husband.
His husband, yeah. I tend to, because Lizzie was an easy target, kind of like a lot of these folks that they would, accuse of being monsters and witches and, vampires. Not so much a land grab in this situation, but, other monetary benefits. That's not a popular take on it.
Now that's a strong possibility, because her brother-in-law was coming around a lot. He kept visiting, and he was there. He showed up. This, just for viewers right now, if you're listening, folks, there's a photograph. The house is green. It's got green shingles. It's got green shutters. And the way it works is, if you're looking at this, the main door into and out of which you go in and emerge is actually on the back of the house. And the front door they don't really use. But the front door, if people are looking where my cursor is, the main road is actually over this away. And, or in fact, no, actually what this is a reverse image.
Well, right across the street, it was a very, very tiny parking lot. And that's where I parked. And I literally got, I'm going to confess here. I took a selfie in front of that sign right there near the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is, you can go in on the left side. There's the main driveway, and there's actually like a little, you can see the outside building over here. There's like an outside building. They have a gift shop over there, and you park in the back parking lot there, and there's a way out this way. But the main thing that actually you can walk around this way. You can't drive in this way. So you're looking at this from across the street. And then in this area behind the building, Chris, it was actually a peach orchard. They had peach trees there, and there was a well. And a lot of people wondered if she had disposed of the hatchet, the murderer, if it was her, in the well. And that's one of the things that they've never found the murder weapon. And they would have thought that if it was this particular hatchet that they had, there would have been some remnants of rust or something like that on the bodies, but there wasn't. And it looked like. So they had no murder weapon. They couldn't really pin the murder on her.
They just thought that she was creepy. That's what she was guilty of in the public eye after the fact, was that she was creepy. And I think that made her even more of a target for something like this, because people would believe it,
Well, and there's a whole nother angle here too, as you see here from this is Grunge. Grunge has this story, and I've never heard this, and I've stayed at the house 3 times. But you have here, according to KQED, which is out west, a nurse who treated Lizzie said that Lizzie had confessed that her boyfriend committed the murders. She was getting to an age where she really wasn't going to marry. She was going to be a spinster. And I didn't know that she had a boyfriend. That said that her boyfriend committed the murders because her father disapproved of the match. The boyfriend's identity remains a mystery. Others have...
that's one of the lesser reported things too about the boyfriend there. Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know this. It says here, others have suggested that Lizzie and Bridget, the Borden's maid, conspired to commit the murders together either because of a romantic relationship between the pair or a mutual dislike of the older Bordens. And the father was not well liked, that's for sure. Bridget appeared to know, or at least suspect, that Lizzie's stepmother was dead before the discovery of the body. And this is one of the things that people should know.
Yeah.
Lizzie's story is such that the way she recounted it, it would have been virtually impossible for her not to have walked by the open door where her stepmother's body was lying on the floor with her head bashed in.
Exactly.
So there's something very strange there.
So I think whether she was this is the difficult part, whether she was the sole perpetrator is up in the air for me. I think other people and her were involved with it, just based on like the trial and the evidence and everything, and these other theories later on that, like the one you just read about boyfriend that was never really disclosed until like all these years later. And then you got there's even other theories where the unknown boyfriend was conspiring with Lizzie's sister and her boyfriend. Like that's another angle too.
And then there's the uncle.
Nurse. Oh yeah.
This guy named Morse. Let's let me go over here. Yeah, so let's check that out. And this is from the Grunge piece again. Lastly, Lizzie's uncle, John V. Morse, may have been the culprit, according to the book Cold Case to Case Closed. Yeah. Morse had been staying with the family but was dismissed as a suspect because of an alibi that was later disproved. Interesting. Moreover, the uncle was a butcher who always carried a cleaver, which is coincidentally a very handy murder weapon, according to the Grunge writer.
It comes in handy, yeah.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because there are so many suspicious things that you see in the weeks prior to. First, you got the strained relationship between Lizzie and her father. He married, after he was widowed, he married a woman she did not like. He changed the will. She was becoming a spinster. It didn't look like she was going to marry. And now it looked like she wasn't going to inherit. And she might have many years where she might actually have to work out in the neighborhood. He was a very well-to-do banker who was not liked. She was visiting the apothecary and getting poison, and people were wondering. Now, I don't see that there's any record that her father was unhealthy and that she was doing slow poisoning on him or anything like that I've seen.
Nothing I've seen. Yeah, that hasn't come up in all
right. Years. Then there's the maid who also was in the house, and you'd say, look, unless if you're going to commit a murder, unless you know that the maid is very far away, are you going to take that first blow and maybe screw up and have somebody speak up?
Right.
And by the way, it was very, very warm. This is another thing they bring up when you stay at the house. The doors and windows were mostly open. Like they had airflow going through because it was so hot. Yeah. And so then there's the question of, doors slamming and things like that. Do people come in and out? And could anybody have gotten in, this sort of thing? But if you're the murderer and you are aware that there's another person, and the maid was going out to the peach field, out to the well. Yep. She was going to the outside house. She was going in a lot of different places. But you could see, and I've lain on the couch in the pose of the father. It was very, very strange. So Heather Graham, the novelist, she and her husband and I, plus another couple writers, we all stayed at the house, and it's a very strange thing because, it's weird because you're attracted to the place because of the fact that these poor people were murdered. So it's a perverse, morbid curiosity sort of thing that you try to suppress. But you can't help but start to try to puzzle it out and say, well, look, was she wrongly accused, or did a criminal walk free? And of course, as you know, after she was found not guilty, she got a lot of money and she invested in a house on the upper, and because the way that Fall River is set up, as you know, but folks around the area don't know, the upper class lived on the hill that's at the center of the city. And then as you lead out of the city more towards Rhode Island, you come down from the hill. That's where the Irish immigrants, a lot of the Catholics lived. And the upper hill was where the English people lived, and they were very well-to-do. They ran the banks. They had a lot of the businesses. They did a lot of the employing of the lower class people. So she got a house up there. She would have parties and invite everybody from down. Like she was very grateful that they let her off.
From like New Bedford and everything.
Yeah. And she was beloved by those people. Like they loved her. She did all sorts of charitable things and all sorts of stuff for the rest of her life, I guess.
So not everyone thought she was creepy, but they thought she was creepy enough during the trial, apparently, that, but in the end, she was acquitted,
Yeah. It's
there's so many theories now, Guard, that it reminds me of Jack the Ripper in terms of all the different theories, one of which, the one that I gravitate towards, which is really out there, is the idea that he escaped to America and is actually buried in Michigan.
Oh, tell me about that. While you do that, Chris, let's draw the attention. And I want to tell the audience again, if you posted a couple things about the scariest stories you've ever read or the candy that you loved, I've only been into the Rockfin chat and the Rumble chat just very briefly. It's been such an intense night. So intense. Chris, I'm so glad that I know you. You're the best.
I wish the camera was working.
Oh no, it's awesome. It's awesome. It's so much fun. And I want to show right now one of the great conversations that you had with Peter Seakosh about Jack the Ripper. And it is just the knowledge you guys have of the Ripper thing. And I was in the chat and I brought up Patricia Cornwell book called Case Closed, Jack the Ripper, and so on and so forth, where she accused the artist Walter Sickert of having been and she made all these psychoanalyses things, claims and stuff. Like she said, oh, well, Sickert's sister had been very involved with charitable causes, but he never gave to charity. So obviously he was a sociopath. It's like, what are you talking about? You've worked with the FBI and you're making that claim? Like, come on. That's insane. That's stupid. But there were a lot of circumstantial things. He was involved with theater, hung out in the Whitechapel area quite a while, showed up at one of the crime scenes in the Camden Town area when nobody should have known about it.
Exactly.
So and they even did a mitochondrial DNA analysis, although it's mitochondrial, of an envelope that the Ripper licked and a stamp that Sickert had licked, and they came up to be like a 96% match. But of course, in a population like London, that leaves, I don't know how many hundreds of people, right? So tell us a little bit about, about like coming over to America.
There was, I guess, at the period of time when the Ripper slayings were kind of coming to an end in Britain. There were a whole rash of Ripper-style murders in New York City all the way up, leading up to Michigan. That's why people think it's a certain individual who I wish I had this stuff in front of me right now. But that guy is the guy that they claim was actually Jack the Ripper escaping from Britain. Supposedly he's buried in Michigan. I forget the town because it was a while ago. But there were like a whole rash of Ripper-like prostitute slayings around that time period, which made a lot of people think, oh, the timing adds up here. Like the Ripper murders ceased over in England, and now these other Ripper-style murders picked up in New York City and the East Coast around the same time. That's where that theory, and I always wanted to do some kind of a screenplay on that whole theory too.
And I think a lot of people confuse the doctor who came from New Hampshire and got set up in the Devil in the White City book that chronicles that doctor who, had that whole building that he, had people work on in sections and created this like house of death. During the World's Fair, and would recruit people to stay there and then murder them and experiment on them in the basement. And they found all the bones and stuff like that. Sort of like Ben Franklin's place.
Ben Franklin, yes.
So now on that side, we know that Ben Franklin was involved with the Hellfire Club. And in fact, when I went to England, just down from Trafalgar Square, there was a pub that had been running, and it just closed during the pandemic. It is no longer running. But it had been a pub that continued to run from the time of Franklin on. And we know Franklin was something of a quirky dude. He took air baths in the nude, sitting
He'd
next
be
to
naked outside.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
The air baths.
Yeah. And there could have been reasons for that. He might have had man on fire syndrome, erythromyalgia. You know, who knows what it was that he needed something to cool his body. We don't know. But he was a member of the Hellfire Club. It's not necessarily that they were, you know, worshiping Hecate as this woman in Pennsylvania is described as doing. But maybe they just wanted to get together, bring in prostitutes, engage in stuff that wasn't seen as
Seems like Eyes Wide Shut type.
Yeah, those parties and stuff like that. But there might be some stronger Illuminati Masonic connections, perhaps. Some sort of you might call it what is it?
Like
What's that?
Like a cremation of care thing.
Yes, that sort of thing. And then, of course, there are the bones that they found in the brownstone, the flat where he would stay.
Yeah.
But that kind of has an easy explanation for most people, is the guy who owned it or rented it or also lived with him was a surgeon and often did.
Yeah, they use that, but I question that. I'm like, is it possible Ben Franklin was actually pretty like a sick individual too? You know, you never know. Never know.
And of course, we know that his son was a loyalist, and they never reconciled. His son was exiled, and he never came back to North America. Yeah. And Ben Franklin, I don't know if they made up, but I'm sure they probably saw each other occasionally when he would go over. But yeah, so there's that whole story. And there's another story, in addition to the Devil in the White City, over to the west, this way, since I'm sort of facing northwest. And so the camera is coming from Santa's angle. But it's interesting, Chris, because at the same time that the Ripper murders were happening, there was, and I read a short sort of a novel / nonfiction thing that this woman wrote about a guy who was a poisoner who actually came from Canada and moved down into Michigan and Illinois. And he started to poison women. First, he poisoned this woman that he was engaged to marry her, but he wanted her money.
Right.
And then he killed her with poison. And he was a doctor. He ran this thing where he had this special medicine that he was selling, you know, snake oil stuff.
Like an elixir.
And then, what's that?
Like an elixir.
Yeah, it was an elixir. It was Dr. So-and-so's, you know, elixir. Right. And he ended up moving to escape from the authorities. And his family was here. They were aware that he was being hunted. He left Northern America and Canada, and he had contracted syphilis. And so he was slowly losing his mind. He went over to London and he committed.
So they think that's what some people think the Jack the Ripper killer. Jack the Ripper had syphilis, and that he was a part of the royal family.
Yeah. I got to watch that Johnny Depp movie again.
From hell.
Yeah, I got to see that again.
I cut you off though. Sorry, I actually thought that's where you were leading with the syphilis thing. Yeah.
Oh no, but it is interesting because what's really weird is this guy, he poisoned like 5 more women in the same number of like years almost.
Yeah.
The Ripper was already doing his thing for those months that the Ripper was doing it. This guy came in, started to poison prostitutes.
Right.
Because evidently he felt that he had contracted syphilis from a prostitute, so he wanted to get back at
that's the theory of the Ripper. Being
right. Yep. Similar thing. And they found him guilty, and at Traitor's Gate, they hanged the guy in London. And just before his hanging, somebody overheard him say something like about Jack, like Jack, I know Jack, or Jack knows. And they had written to each other. They were corresponding with each other somehow.
Wow.
It's absolutely wild. Like evidently, like they were putting it's this crazy story where this guy actually admired Jack the Ripper.
Wow.
And they don't know whether they actually met, these two guys. But this guy, the reason this guy got nailed was because some police officer recognized something to do with his shoes. Has something to do with the shoes that he had, some nice shoes that didn't belong in some area or something like that. And he realized that this was a John for prostitutes.
Right.
Even though the dude was dressed up like he'd forgotten to make himself look like a bum or something and forgotten his shoes. It was something.
Like the three tramps in Dealey Plaza. The one, you know what I'm talking about? Where they,
no. What's all that about? There's plenty more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live coming up.
Free Talk Live.
So when talking to a liberal, you have to be politically correct, but when talking to a conservative, you have to be patriotically correct.
Yeah, it's funny how conservatives forget while they're making fun of liberals and how triggered they get over, social issues. But if you don't stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem at a hockey game or something, you might get some glares. You might get some people really upset.
I actually had somebody tell me when I was at the State House last week, you should really be standing during the pledge. No, I shouldn't. I don't pledge allegiance to things that don't, give some kind of reciprocal
I'm a slave
protection.
To a piece of cloth. This is my stupid brain-dead life. Amen.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern at freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Caroline Malone. US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are visiting the state of Maine following the most deadly gun massacre in the nation this year. 18 people were murdered and others were injured on October 25th when an Army reservist with known mental health problems attacked people apparently randomly in a bowling alley and bar. Biden is paying respects to the victims and grieving family and community members. On Air Force One on the way over, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said the president supports further action by Congress now.
The president has taken historic action over the last 2.5 years to end the gun violence epidemic tearing our nation apart. Congress has a responsibility too. They must pass on an assault weapons ban. They must enact universal background checks, require safe storage, and end immunity from liability for manufacturers. Congress has the power to ensure an event like this does not happen again. The time is now to act.
Former US President Donald Trump's son, Eric, has taken to the stand for a second day in a trial that could cripple the family business. Eric Trump has again denied any involvement in inflating financial documents to win more favourable terms from insurers and lenders. Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
Eric Trump says he's been relying on company accountants and lawyers to verify the business financial documents and maintains he knew nothing. But when faced with evidence during his cross-examination, emails that showed he signed off on documents that estimated the value of properties, he continued saying he counted on others to ensure those estimates were accurate. He told the court that he does not recall many of the interactions as he was involved at times on other aspects of the business. The judge has already ruled that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the assets, and the trial is largely about what penalty they should face. Donald Trump is expected to testify on Monday, already denying any wrongdoing. Jody Jacobs, New York.
At least 5 people have died after devastating floods in central Italy. Storm Ciarán hit the country on Thursday night after leaving behind a trail of destruction in the UK, France, and other parts of Western Europe. Italy correspondent Giles Gibson has more.
The regional governor of Tuscany said it had been a long and complex night for search and rescue teams who used rubber boats to evacuate people from their homes in the pitch black. As dawn arrived, revealing the extent of the damage from the rising waters, local authorities also declared a state of emergency. In a statement, the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed her deep condolences for the victims' families and said she's keeping in constant touch with local authorities and emergency teams on the ground. Giles Gibson, Rome.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSM.
You can help spread the ideas of liberty with our Patreon for just $5 per month at amps.freetalklive.com.
We continue on Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
Oh, the three tramps. It's a famous photograph of the three suspects, supposed suspects, that they're They were parading through Dealey Plaza from the railroad car, and they all three of these supposed bums have like brand new expensive shoes on.
Whoa.
You know, their clothes aren't dirty. They're the farthest looking from bums around. You know, some people think one of them is Charles Harrelson, Woody Harrelson's father, because he's made the claim he was a grassy knoll shooter for a long time.
Yeah. And I think is I know Woody, you know, Woody had some tough times trying to deal with what his father had been like.
He was a hitman for the mob. He was a hitman, and he killed a judge and went to prison for life for it. Yeah,
it's wild. It's so strange, you know, to be raised by a guy who gives you love and affection, probably, and yet, you know, you discover these things. It's absolutely weird. And I can, you know, I can imagine. Let me ask you this, Chris, on the JFK story. I know that over at the Future Freedom Foundation, Jacob Hornberger is, you know, like Don Jeffries, very steeped in a lot of knowledge about the JFK assassination and RFK assassination.
Oh, yeah.
And what's curious about this is that he says that the Zapruder film was edited, and I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
That I personally think it was. I mean, if you just look at, I mean, I don't know what your take is on James Fetzer. He kind of went into the Sandy Hook stuff later on and things like that.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that much about him.
Well, anyway, he did a lot of the original 9/11 truth research back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, he was a huge JFK researcher. He put out a book called The Great Zapruder Film Hoax. And he actually, in my opinion, did some decent work. And Donald and I have talked about that many times, Fetzer's book. There is a lot of weird cuts and like oddities in the Zapruder film. If you actually look at the crowds on both sides of the limo, their movements are very like unrealistic looking or unnatural looking if the next time you go to see it. It's like it seems like they were filmed at shortly before the motorcade shows up, and then they kind of like a pasting of both together in a way. If you look at, I can tell you right now, there's definitely been editing to that when you never see the motorcade turn onto Elm Street, that wide turn that William Greer did.
Yeah, that's true.
All of a sudden the limo just shows up.
It's just,
that's it. You see the two cops that were on motorcycles before. You see them at the very beginning, but you never see the limo stop that over 200 witnesses claim to have seen, that stopped for a good between 2 and 5 seconds. William Greer hit the brakes. And we know that because the film that was across the street from Abraham Zapruder actually shows the brake lights like turning on at a certain point.
That's right. And, you know, I know that Jacob Hornberger also mentions that a lot of the people who were close to Zapruder or had their hands on the film or anything like that, they met very untimely deaths.
Well, a lot of the people that he dealt with, we found out were CIA assets after the fact, and he may have been one himself. And the guy, I forget the name of the actual guy. Peter's going to kill me if he sees this. The name of the guy that was running Time Life at the time.
Yeah.
At the time. He was a known CIA asset. He was basically in charge of purchasing the rights to the Zapruder film. And that's why the Time Life building held the Zapruder film pretty much until 1975, when Geraldo would play it on Good Night America, his show in 1975 with Dick Gregory there and Robert Grodin and everything. But prior to that, the only other time it came out of the vault was for Jim Garrison's trial in 1968 or whatever. I think, 68, 69. So that the jury could actually watch it. But anyway, there's splices all over there, man. And like, there's supposedly supposed to be bullet holes in the Stemmons freeway sign. Those are not in the existing film today. So a lot of things that eyewitnesses saw that are not in the film, like the actual real wounds to the back of JFK's head.
Wow. Yeah.
Like,
and, the whole magic bullet thing and
ridiculous.
Spectre being brought in. Spectre.
Arlen Specter and Gerald Ford. That was the creation of both of them. And
absolutely. Total cutouts. Their entire careers promoted through CIA connections.
Became president of the United States without because Nixon resigns.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he pardons Nixon.
And it makes me think, Chris, and I know we sort of touched on this a little bit, but if we look at some of the cultural icons in fiction and music and things like that, whether it's connections to Tavistock or even earlier than that, you look at people like Aleister Crowley, you look at people like Ian Fleming's James Bond books, or Roald Dahl, or all these people, H.G. Wells. So many of these people were in positions that, even Arthur Conan Doyle, possibly, although probably unlikely.
And Huxley was another.
Yeah, Huxley, exactly. They were
Huxley
in positions.
He died on November 22nd, 1963.
That's right. I remember that. That was going to be the big news until Kennedy was assassinated.
Kennedy, yeah.
Exactly. But what's curious that I find is it makes you think, okay, some of these people and some of these, bands and so on, some of these movements were promoted by things like the Tavistock Institute over in London and, that sort of thing. And they try to form these new narratives for the zeitgeist to pick up, for the culture to pick up, and they'll fund. They put in a bunch of money. They go to Laurel Canyon. They do all these things. And then I'm thinking about
the Laurel Canyon thing was all one of my heroes, the late great Dave McGowan, went all into how the anti-war movement of the 1960s and the peace and love of the hippies and everything was all manufactured by military and intelligence communities in Laurel Canyon.
Yeah. Controlled opposition. Absolutely. And coming in Generation X, you could see how completely fraudulent it was. I just sat there and looked at the hippie movement. I'm like, this is ridiculous. They're not anti-authoritarian. A lot of these people are suckers. And but what was fascinating was I started to think about some of these figures who were major figures. Now you look at a guy like Roald Dahl. Amazing talent. Stories are incredible. The wit is amazing.
Yeah.
Like every one of his stories is amazing, right? The guy clearly was a genius, brilliant guy.
Yeah.
By the same token, he was a spy.
He was.
So, how much of his popularity came from, it's a very strange thing. You got people like Julia Child, right?
Julia Child created shark repellent, and something, Guard. A lot of people don't know this. She, at the very last minute, or her assistant, one of the two, canceled her flight on Flight 11 on September 11, 2001. Kind of like Seth MacFarlane, a Family Guy, Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch there, Mark Wahlberg. He was supposed to be on Flight 11 as well. And Julia Child was.
Whoa.
That'll be in Hidden History 3 coming up. So.
Wow. Don Jeffrey's going to be, you guys are rocking it. So, and again, I say it with a certain amount of trepidation with some caveats. And the same thing, I don't want to ascribe.
There could be something to it. These pop culture figures are used. They're used to shape public opinion. Yeah. And I think you're 100%. And John Potash goes into what Dave McGowan left when Dave McGowan got sick and was murdered, in my opinion. John Potash kind of took up, and Donald Jeffries took up the mantle in terms of continuing that line of questioning about, especially on Borrowed Fame, Don's book before Asking the Truth. What had happened was he was kind of going into the weird scenes inside the canyon, Dave McGowan territory.
Dave McGowan, right.
Because Don and Dave and John Potash, they were able to make connections with the intelligence communities and entertainment, like music and movements, and John Lennon's assassination, murder.
But the only thing for me, Chris, is that I don't want to, in thinking about the fact that there are these other shadowy forces that could either promote someone who is unknown and help make that person known, or take some people who are relatively unknown but have a lot of talent and make them known. The problem with that is it can be seen as undercutting the authentic talent and work of those people. And I just don't know, so Roald Dahl, clearly genius.
Whether they were given it or not, it's a good question. That you can't really prove, but is it possible? I think so. It is possible.
Yeah. Right. And it's weird. It makes you think about, like, okay, so we know that the Tavistock Institute was very interested in pushing the psychedelics and that whole era. We know that the Beatles, they had gotten some smiles from the Tavistock Institute, but I don't know how much, And
some people think it's fully a Tavistock thing, the Beatles, which really breaks my heart, but you never
Wait,
know.
what was that?
Some people think that the Tavistock was completely behind the Beatles, which breaks my heart. Yeah, but I can't prove it one way or the other. But I can't say. And then,
but then you go to, if they weren't and I know that there are so many great bands out there that could be huge, and they just don't. Just circumstances, it doesn't happen.
Some of them catch a break. What's that thing, Guard? You ever question that? Like, why do some people get the break?
Exactly.
That's when it comes into play. You go, why? What made these ones different from these starving artists over here?
Right.
Do they have any weird connections, like family connections to military intelligence sometimes? I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of these people, like Jim Morrison, his father was responsible for the Gulf of Tonkin incident, one of the biggest false flags in American or world history. And then all of a sudden he becomes a rock star that could not read or write music and was going to film school, UCLA, to be a director.
Now, the words he comes up with, this is the thing. So you have his girlfriend, talking about his poetry, and, she's got letters from him and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you're saying he couldn't read music or write music, but he could read.
I'm pretty sure it's on record that he even said that he himself, I could be wrong, but I think he was even quoted as saying, I'm not a musician. I can't read or write.
No, but he could read and write. His lyricism. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. It's not that the government can just turn on people who have no talent and then just put them in these slots. Sometimes they can. If they're good looking people, they can make them phenomenons, I'm sure. Right.
Some people think like a lot of the hits of the 60s that were like the anti-war peace and love crowd, like those kind of songs. Some people think the Wrecking Crew, session musicians, were responsible for most of those hits.
Well, we know that they sure did produce a lot of them. You just look at the Monkees, and they've openly talked about that. It's part of their history. And then they broke free, and they were able to do Headquarters, which showed that they had talent as well.
Oh yeah.
And then they did Head, and that was amazing and stuff like that. It's just absolutely fascinating.
But I only say the Wrecking Crew just because you're right. It's not to take any legitimate talent away from any of the legitimate artists that, put their stuff out there. But you do have, things like the Wrecking Crew, where a bunch of session musicians that don't take the credit at the time for a lot of these hits. Like, could they be a military intelligence thing? Now I'm really sounding really...
No, but okay. So let's look at it this way. We look at the narrative for Singing in the Rain. A beautiful story, people breaking out from the silent era into the talkies. And there's that scene with the yes, 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 no, no, no. And so we know that the woman who really has the beautiful voice and is singing is the talented one behind the face. It's a Cyrano de Bergerac type thing. Yeah. So
you even got Milli Vanilli right there and then. They didn't sing anything.
Right. And, I think over time, clearly these bands, these musicians, if they have been given a leg up, they've got to sustain it themselves. They've got to show that they've got the talent. But there are these, these momentary movements, these popular eras of things that pop up, and you say, how much of this was fed and propelled?
There is some people that I've seen some presentations out there where even, I don't know if you're a fan of the band The Police or not, but some people think that was put together by an intelligence.
You got Copeland, right?
Yeah.
And you got IRS records.
That's
You know,
right.
They call it IRS records.
Yeah.
But then again, then you've got it's
weird.
so
I'm not-
difficult to
I
figure
think
it out.
could it be a case of a little bit of both, maybe?
Well,
Maybe
that's
there could
possible.
be instances where there's these musicians and filmmakers that are propped up by the intel communities, but also legitimate artists and things like that struggle and never are propped up and never given
Yeah.
the time of day in terms of that lucky stroke that we
I
hear
think,
about.
I think that's really the case. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
don't
The
know.
jury's out for me, but I'll just say that. Chris, let's hop into Rockfin and Rumble chat and see what
Okay.
people have going on. And Chris, get ready because I want you to tell me when you went trick or treating what your favorite Halloween candy was or still is.
You want to know right now?
And
Candy corn.
hold on, wait. Hold, I want people. Yeah, I want people.
right.
Brian Dead McCartney is in Rockfin chat. Millie lip syncing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anarchy Andrew is there. And Anarchy Andrew says, "Girl, you know it's true."
I was going to say, girl, you know it's true.
This is great. This is great. And Brian Dead McCartney says, "Mephistopheles was not my name." Oh, this is awesome. Great chat. So everybody throw into the chat, and I know you might have already done it, so I apologize that I didn't get there sooner. Throw into your chat. Oh, Brian Dead McCartney says, wax lips and whistles. Remember those wax lips with the candy stuff inside?
Oh, yeah.
Remember the monsters that you could get and you could break them open? They had the mummy and they had like the sweet liquid inside.
I would have that, and I would have what you referred to earlier as a Ben Cooper mask. It was
the
Adam
Ben
West
Coopers.
Batman, the Adam West Batman Ben Cooper mask.
Oh, yep. I had the Spidey.
Oh,
one.
I had
first
that
grade.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
Suits. I had
Those-
suits as well.
It was awesome stuff. And okay, let's see what other ones we got over in Rumble chat, Chris, before we get your favorite candy or favorite. Hold on just a minute. Okay, so we've got JB Morrison, not Jim Morrison,
Right.
2112. Excellent. Let's see. We've got over in Rumble is Northern Cardinal. And who else is over there? Boy, a lot of people watching over there. That's super cool. Let's see. So, yeah, throw in guard. I went sightseeing in Salem back in 1984, says Northern Cardinal. That was a cool tour and folklore. Yeah, and you go down to the museum, they have that whole thing where you go in and they have the stuff that you can watch with the sounds and everything. It's pretty
I
weird.
got in there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and there are amazing restaurants there. Last time I was down there, I had lunch with Heather Graham and her husband and a couple of their kids, and it was just the best fish. Oh man, so good. So let me see. Jason Barker, I'm for candy corn, he says. Brian Taylor says, I like candy corn as well. Don't know why it gets so much hate. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Brian De McCartney has a memory of using a pillowcase for candy. Absolutely. Brian Deb says, mix it with honey roasted peanuts, and it's like a salted nut roll.
Yeah.
Ooh, whoa. That would be wicked good, as they'd say in New England.
As long as it didn't, wicked piss. Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as it didn't have a razor blade in it.
I know. Hey, Chris, let me ask you this. Did you ever go dunking for apples?
Oh, of course. Oh,
yeah. Now, when you were a kid and you went dunking for apples, I remember the first time I ever put my head all the way under. I was dunking for an apple at our friend the Leach's house, and I saw some of the Leaches when we were at the memorial service for one of our neighbors, Mr. Driscoll, last Saturday. And I remember they had one of those big farmer metal buckets, and the apples were there. Did they put coins inside the apples that you would try to get the coins?
No, at the time, I think they didn't do anything to the apples just for fear that people would think you were, putting razor blades in there.
Oh, right. Yeah, in this case, they would have pennies, not all the apples.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And, you have to try to see because they'd float and then you'd see and you're like, you'd target, like a bird going after a fish.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, and you pin it at the bottom. You had to pin it at the bottom, and then you could get it up. and it would be great, But then it would have nickels and quarters in some of them, like the super special things. Like, oh, I'm going for that. I'm not going for the penny. I'm going for the dime. I'm going for that.
Over the quarter. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. It was really great. Let me see. Matrox 2 is there over in Rumble. Thank you for joining us, Matrix. Also, let's see. Taylor Saunders is in there with us. Brian De McCartney says, no popcorn balls or caramel apples. Those were the razor blade candies. No, you never accept an apple out of somebody's house. No way. I can get my own apples. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want something that's wrapped, and I want to unwrap it and look at it under the light. And of course, when we invest in the X-ray machine, then I'll really know.
Yeah, and you know what? To be fair, though, come to find out, a lot of that hysteria, and that was a hysteria too. People putting pins and stuff. It was actually I think maybe 1 or 2 isolated cases where it was a family member doing it to the kid.
Oh.
And then that kind of grew into this big, huge thing, kind of like
urban legend.
Yeah.
And like I said, I remember one time. I usually went with. I never really wanted to go as a ghost, but one time I went as a ghost. And the one time I went as a ghost, we went downtown into. I got hit by an egg. I got hit by like 2 eggs. It was awful. It was terrible. And there's a place in our town, Chris, where the Burns family lived there. It's right downtown on the Oval, and it's only a couple houses away from where I went to kindergarten in this brick school. And it was the old bank, and they still have the vault. So every year at Halloween, they'd have the cotton on the trees, and it would look really cool. And they'd have strobe lights and sound effects and stuff, and like the Disney sound effects on the records, And you go in.
I missed those. The cassette.
Oh,
tapes.
they were great. Yeah, yeah. All the sound effects and. Sort of like if you listen to the laugh tracks of those 60s TV, there was always that deep-throated dude who did the chortle. He was a chortler, like that. That's that guy. I heard of him on Get Smart, and now he's on Hogan's Heroes too. I see. Okay,
so
yeah. But they would always have this situation where you'd have to go into the vault, and it would be only lit by candles, and they'd have the door open, and you'd have to go in. And there would be this witch sitting there with her, like a woman dressed as a witch with the candy. But behind you, somebody was waiting. So you would have your attention attracted by the witch. And then the witch would move. And then the guy would come out behind you. And it was just like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the scariest one for me, dude, was I might have mentioned this to you before. There was another place not too far from there where they had this barn. And one year.
Oh yeah.
To get the candy, you had to go through like this like little maze thing they had made with like trash bags taped black and stuff.
Spook trail.
Yeah, exactly. And so at the last thing of it was the last open space of the barn was like this 20-foot area where they had trash bags on the floor, and they had like this little walking thing next to it, and they had this plank that you had to walk across.
Wow.
And you had to go very slowly in the dark. So you had to place one foot in front of the other over this like thing. And so I'm like, they're like, no, but you can take your mom's hand. Right. So your mom will guide you as she goes next to you. I'm like, okay. So they shut the lights off and you take her hand and you go along in the dark, slowly concentrating. And you make it across, they turn the lights on, and it's not my mom.
Oh.
It's a woman dressed as a witch, and she goes, ah! You're like, oh!
Yeah.
It was so scary. It was just like, why did you do it? Was the Karen Black, Zeke doll thing from Trilogy of Terror.
The
Zuni doll.
Yeah.
That's what it was like. It was like what? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh man, we got to watch the Zuni doll one. Let me see. Brian De McCartney says went as a sad, wimpy, one-ply trash bag 1 year, and I won first prize.
Oh, God.
There's plenty more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live coming up.
I've been told no in many different ways.
I give you an order and you're going to obey it.
George, you can go this way. You can do that and you have to leave here.
You cannot bring signs into the
with me. Well, I'm comfortable here, actually. Whoa, 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 whoa. Hey. Who do you think you are? Excuse me.
There is no video and audio allowed in this office.
No, I have work today. This is...
You ain't gonna make it.
Wait
now.
Wait a minute.
Whoa.
Hey! Oh my God! Unbelievable!
Why are you running from me?
Because you're scared me. What am I being detained for?
You're being served.
What is this?
You're being served.
What is this?
Bureaucrats have a funny way of telling people no.
That's the sound of the men working on the chain.
Derek J's Victimless Crime Spree. Watch it for free and order the Director's Cut DVD at victimlesscrimespree.com.
My name is Jacob Hornberger. I'm president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, which Congressman Ron Paul awarded for having an outstanding freedom website. Write us at fff@fff.org, and we'll send you a free 3-month subscription to our monthly journal of libertarian essays and our booklet, Economic Liberty in the Constitution, which George Mason University economics professor Walter Williams praised in a recent column. That's fff@fff.org.
What if you want to hear the latest episode of Free Talk Live, but all you have is your phone, you forgot to download our archive, and you have no data connection? You can call our Listen line at 641-793-0191. That's a long-distance number, so you may incur charges. If not, listen as long as you want. 641-793-0191. The Free Talk Live Listen line, 641-793-0191.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 3 up next after the news here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Caroline Malone. US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are visiting the state of Maine following the most deadly gun massacre in the nation this year. 18 people were murdered and others were injured on October 25th when an Army reservist with known mental health problems attacked people apparently randomly in a bowling alley and bar. Biden is paying respects to the victims and grieving family and community members. On Air Force One on the way over, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said the president supports further action by Congress now.
The president has taken historic action over the last 2.5 years to end the gun violence epidemic tearing our nation apart. Congress has a responsibility too. They must pass on an assault weapons ban. They must enact universal background checks, require safe storage, and end immunity from liability for manufacturers. Congress has the power to ensure an event like this does not happen again. The time is now to act.
Former US President Donald Trump's son, Eric, has taken to the stand for a second day in a trial that could cripple the family business. Eric Trump has again denied any involvement in inflating financial documents to win more favourable terms from insurers and lenders. Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
Eric Trump says he's been relying on company accountants and lawyers to verify the business financial documents and maintains he knew nothing. But when faced with evidence during his cross-examination, emails that showed he signed off on documents that estimated the value of properties, he continued saying he counted on others to ensure those estimates were accurate. He told the court that he does not recall many of the interactions as he was involved at times on other aspects of the business. The judge has already ruled that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the assets, and the trial is largely about what penalty they should face. Donald Trump is expected to testify on Monday, already denying any wrongdoing. Jody Jacobs, New York.
At least 5 people have died after devastating floods in central Italy. Storm Ciarán hit the country on Thursday night after leaving behind a trail of destruction in the UK, France, and other parts of Western Europe. Italy correspondent Giles Gibson has more.
The regional governor of Tuscany said it had been a long and complex night for search and rescue teams who used rubber boats to evacuate people from their homes in the pitch black. As dawn arrived, revealing the extent of the damage from the rising waters, local authorities also declared a state of emergency. In a statement, the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed her deep condolences for the victims' families and said she's keeping in constant touch with local authorities and emergency teams on the ground. Giles Gibson, Rome.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks. Listening today to new music by The Beatles. Well, at least one track, their last ever. Unless you've been on a distant planet, you will know that Now and Then was released on Thursday. Created with the benefit of AI technology, it puts the band back together. And it's based on a ragged, partial demo of the song that John Lennon recorded in the late 70s. Oliver Murray made a documentary about the song's creation.
It's called machine audio learning, and essentially you give the software enough information that it recognizes what John's voice should sound like. I like using this term musical archaeology, brushing away the layers of the frequencies that you don't want, but trying to retain all the ones you do. The added level of care and attention that only really came into being for their Get Back series with Peter Jackson. Then there was this extra engagement with new technology where Paul asked the question, is it possible to revisit this song that we could never crack in a way that he should sound on an actual proper Beatles record?
And lo, the four were fab again. One last reminder of the Beatles' unique sound and contribution to popular music. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again. President Biden pays respects to the victims of the most deadly mass shooting in the US on a trip to Maine. Eric Trump, the son of the former president, denies all involvement in exaggerating family business values for financial gain in an ongoing New York trial. And Storm Ciarán continues to wreak havoc in Europe, killing at least 5 people in floods in Italy. There's more from us on Twitter at Feature Story. And that's the latest from Feature Story News. Caroline Malone reporting.
This is the Onion Week in Review. A study finds that Americans need 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep at work in order to leave the office feeling refreshed and alert. Leading endocrinologists told reporters that more and more people are pulling all-dayers and drinking coffee just to keep themselves awake for meetings and conference calls, and that in order to be properly rested, employees should arrive at work, check their email for a few hours, and be sound asleep by 11:30 a.m. at the very latest.
In order for the body to properly function, adults need to make sure that they're well rested and they're not staying up too late at work.
The Lord our God, divine creator and ruler of the universe, announced Wednesday that he does not consider human beings his most impressive creation, saying instead that mountains are categorically superior in every way. Claiming that mankind was a good creation and worthy of praise, the deity explained that human beings simply pale in comparison to the slopes, valleys, and sheer magnitude of a snow-capped 20,000-foot mountain, and that while all humans eventually grow old and die, mountains last forever.
This is the Onion News Network.
Yep, we still do email. Drop your email address in the entry box at freetalklive.com, and you'll be kept in the loop with Free Talk Live.
We continue on Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
I went as a McPizza one time. You remember those?
Well, oh, yes!
McDonald's had a
right. I
pizza.
forgot they used to have those things.
Yeah, it was
They were
gross.
like that big, weren't they?
Yeah, they still sell them in the Midwest. Yeah.
Do they really?
Yeah, last time
Wow. I wonder if they're, made from that era and they just have them in cold storage.
yeah. Yeah, I think so.
They put them in their McDonald's fallout shelters, McShelter.
Yeah, they hydrated it like Marty McFly and Back to the Future. Well, you sure can hydrate a pizza.
Oh man. So now over on Rumble, Northern Cardinal says, who hands out pennies? Yeah, I remember sometimes people any thoughts on Stephen King shooting John Lennon?
Yeah, that's a
says
whole
Hal
thing,
9000 Watson.
That's a whole thing. Yeah. How many hours do you have, Guard?
Really?
There's
I've never
a lot
heard
there.
that.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Yeah.
All right, we'll have to schedule another time when you can come in. Hal, you tell us if you want to come on sometime. Hal, you can join us. Well, I'll throw it in the chat thing. You can come in. That'll be awesome. And Chris, when you were a kid, did you ever have to do one of those things where like they bring you into a place and you have to put your hand in like the brains and the Jello and all that stuff?
It was eyeballs.
Yeah, the eyeballs.
Oh, It was right out of the 80s. Yeah, I remember they also would make us bring around UNICEF too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep. I remember that. That was right. Oh, Harry Hart is in the Rockfin chat. Brian Taylor's there. I had a friend that went as a toilet one year.
Yeah, I knew someone like that. We didn't really talk to him.
Oh man. Real McCoy says, I was a fairy godmother one year at school. Fun costume. Then Brian D. McCartney says, Flying Purple Eaters and Love Potion number 9. Good stuff.
Oh,
they're talking about
Purple People Eaters.
Yeah. And there's so many great songs. I remember one year I was a DJ just out of college. I was doing that overnight show, Chris.
Yeah.
Out of
FNX, right? FNX.
Well, it was the one that everybody at FNX liked. It was WMDK, Monadnock Radio, 92.1 FM.
Oh,
and it was in Peterborough, New Hampshire, there was a great blues bar that was just around the corner. Yeah. And it was awesome. And, that's where I got to play like Stairway to Heaven backwards at 3 a.m. And yeah, it was really fun. It was cool. But what was interesting?
Did you have Charles Laquadera call in?
No, didn't have Charles, and we didn't have the Fool's Parade, but that was really funny. I did a takeoff of the Fool's Parade by playing the extended remix of Inagata Davida for like a half hour. I just made it up. I was like,
it's like an hour and a half right there.
Yeah, right. And it was, it was really weird. It really was like being Wolfman Jack in
Wolfman Jack.
Yeah, it was like American Graffiti, because you're out in the middle of nowhere, and it was wild. But for Halloween one year, I got to do this special show. I planned it all out, had to do it live, and everything. I used every possible sound source. We had CD players, 2 turntables, and a cassette machine, and I went from one to the other with sound clips on the cassette that I had taken from Kolchak the Night Stalker, Psycho, all these different things. I rented out stuff because at that time you couldn't go digital. I had to go from VHS through the jacks in the back to my tape machine, know the order of stuff. So I would go between tunes playing cuts from horror movies, like all that stuff, right? And
they're coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming.
Yeah. And that was the thing that Audi at Modern Retro Radio, he was like, oh, you got to find that. I was like, I still have it on cassette somewhere. But it was fun. And, all these great songs like Psycho Killer, Those Are People Who Died, It's Too Late to Fall in Love with Sharon Tate, Godzilla.
Who is that by? It's Too Late to Fall in Love with Sharon Tate.
That's the Jim Carroll band. And, of course, he wrote Basketball Diaries and stuff.
And his ex-wife, Rosemary Carroll, ended up becoming Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love's entertainment lawyer, and was married to Danny Goldberg of Gold Mountain. And she's crucial to the Tom Grant, Kurt Cobain murder theory.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Rosemary Carroll. Yeah, Jim Carroll, his ex.
Isn't that wow? I didn't know that. And of course, he came over from Ireland and was almost a professional basketball player of all things. Who would have thought an Irish dude would be like that good? But
that's right.
I guess he was pretty darn good. Yeah. And so all those songs, I really dug around and found so many cool things. Of course, Bauhaus, Bela Lugosi's Dead, and Scary Monsters by Bowie and stuff like that, and that sort of stuff. Cat People, the original version with the Charlie Callis stuff, and I remember my brother was listening. Monster Mash, Boris, so many good songs. Flying Purple People Eater. Let's check out a little more here. We've got Brian's favorite, The Night Stalker. Yes, the Junkyard episode. We're talking the zombie with Cab Calloway. Well, not Cab Calloway. Scatman Crothers.
Yeah, from The Shining. From The Shining. Yep. Yeah.
And you know who was one of the key writers on Kolchak was the guy who created The Sopranos. What's that dude's name?
David Chase.
Yeah, David Chase. He was that was one of his early things, was the Night Stalker. And a lot of people don't know this, but part of the reason that the Night Stalker didn't continue was because Darren McGavin, essentially the whole production staff fell apart. And it was up to Darren McGavin. He was acting, in many cases, not only acting as the star in the show, but as executive producer for a while. He put his own money into it.
He was like a showrunner.
Yeah, he was the showrunner, and and he was doing script editing and stuff, and he was playing a character who the character was 10 years younger than he actually was. He was in his late 50s playing a guy in his 40s, and he was running around and doing all this. Remember the Paramount Faye one? Paramount Faye's gonna get you.
Man. Then he later on go to a different holiday kind of theme with Christmas Story.
Oh yeah, boy! I've never seen that. I've only seen clips. It's supposed to be great. I've really got to see it.
I think because Ted Turner replayed it throughout the 90s on TNT and TBS, I think it kind of got this following it never had that during the first run.
Yeah. And I know they did a sequel last year. I think.
Yeah,
with all the
and
actors.
I heard that. Yeah, I heard that. Don't bother.
Oh, no, that's too bad. But Kolchak was it. I mean, there was nothing cooler than Kolchak. And even when they were doing the Monster of the Week episodes for that one season that they got after the first 2 TV movies that Richard Matheson scripted, when they got to do those stories, I think, especially because David Chase did such a good job. And Chris, I think I mentioned to you that if you watch, as you know, I know you know at least part of this,
like the X-Files. Yeah.
Well, so we have the X-Files connection where the episode Jose Chung's from Outer Space, where they brought Charles Nelson Riley in as the writer, Jose Chung. Originally, they wanted that to be Darren McGavin's Kolchak, and he was writing a book and he was going to investigate it and that sort of stuff. But they couldn't do it because the rights to Kolchak were all bound up with Universal TV, and it was a real mess. So they couldn't do it. So they ended up doing that instead with Charles Nelson Riley, and it just became a classic, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so good. So good. And I think I told you, I met the bleep dude, Peter, the guy who played
in Vancouver.
Vancouver, his wife.
William B. Davis.
Oh, well, William Davis was the smoking man, but the guy who played the bleep man, the cop, was like, I got your bleeping aliens in that episode, Jose Chung.
Oh, yeah, that's
that
right.
was the husband to a woman named Elizabeth who did casting for The Outer Limits. And she and another woman invited me to this film release party thing. And she introduces me to her husband. And she's like, oh, Gardner, I want you to meet Peter. And I'm like, I know the guy. I'm like, do I know you? I'd only been in Vancouver like 2 months. So I was like, do we know each other? Like, do you live in Burnaby? Like, how do I know? And then he's like, no, I don't think we've ever met. I was like, wait a minute, you're the bleep guy. And he goes, yes, I am. He was very happy about being the bleep guy. It was
that was his claim to fame.
Yeah. And in fact, I have to mention, Eric Shiner has a connection through family to a person who just helped out with the anniversary, 30th or 35th anniversary or something of the X-Files, this big convention. And that guy, Pete, they invited him to the convention. They had Krychek there. They had Skinner there. They had the smoking man. They had the lone gunman were there. They had virtually everybody.
Krychek, huh?
Oh, yeah. They had it. I guess it was just a real success. Everybody loved it. They just had such a good time. And they're thinking about doing another convention in London. And I don't know. It looks like maybe David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson might be able to go to that one. So it could be kind of cool. So
Gard, were you ever up for X-Files? I never asked you that.
No, I visited the gate. So when I worked at Outer Limits, we were at these studios in Burnaby, just on the eastern edge of Vancouver proper, along this thing called the Lougheed Highway. And there was a restaurant called Earl's. Like anybody who's been there, and they know the intersection, because it's not even, there was like fields and stuff there too. It wasn't really that built up. It wasn't super built up, but it was like suburban as you're heading west to go to Vancouver. And then just a couple blocks in, you were in Vancouver. But so there was a really nice restaurant called Earl's. And then just south of that, which, you just look beyond, you could see the studios and the sound stages and stuff rising up behind that. It wasn't super huge, but they had a number of sound stages there. And that was the Bridge Studios. And then if you went, just took a couple corners and you went over a bridge, you'd go over the inlet towards the mountains where Lynn Canyon was and stuff like that. A lot of beautiful mountains and skiing are up there. Right down there near the water's level was another studio, and that's where X-Files, where most of their sets were located. And then when they for their exteriors, they shot a lot up in this place called Lynn Canyon. And that's very interesting because Lynn Canyon, when I went up there, I used to go hiking up there. It wasn't really like hiking. I mean, they had trails and stuff. You just walk through the trails like around my house. And I guess they call it hiking. I just call it going in the woods,
Just walking. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just in the woods, right? So, but it was really cool because they had this little inlet where they had glacial water that came down this river, and it was this amazing emerald green. It was wild. It was like green jello. And it was the coldest water I've ever felt. Like I put my legs in it and it was like steel fingers just wrapping around my legs. It was so wild. Wow. And it wasn't like I was going to go swimming, but I sat on a rock out there and I was like, whoa. And but what was weird was they had cougar all over the place there. And you had to carry a cowbell with you. You know, you felt like you were in Blue Oyster Cult carrying a cowbell around because you had to, like, not all the time, but when there was a cougar alert, you know, they're like, okay, well, if you want to go out there, you better bring the cowbell with you. And you'd like bang the cowbell every once in a while to keep the cougars away. And so I was like,
that really would scare them off.
I know, maybe it was like the mask with the pandemic, you know, so-called pandemic.
Okay, good point.
Yeah, I don't know, man, you know, but it was weird because you'd be walking around, and after that, by the time I finished at Outer Limits, and by that time, immediately I could tell if I was watching a show, I was like, oh, that was shot in Vancouver. Like I could tell because the houses the driveways have certain lips, and there's certain design of the road of the houses and stuff like that. And I'll give you another example. Here's a weird one. So, you know, two things. First, the end of Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah.
Genius. Okay, so first thing I'll tell you is, I think I might have mentioned to you, I found out, I always wanted to figure out where Ape City was located.
Yeah.
And I figured it out, despite the fact that they shot Conquest of the Planet of the Apes and all those things out in Studio City, where they had built some stuff, and you could tell those buildings are there.
Yeah.
You couldn't really tell coming from the East Coast if you didn't know it. It was just this futuristic city, right?
Yeah.
So that was, and you know, the first movie, the ending, and spoilers for anybody, it ends in New York.
Yep.
Of course. So I used to try to backtrack because I was like, okay, they landed in a desert, you know, in a lake, and then they went northwest through the desert for X number of days. They had these provisions, so that would bring them up towards here. Yeah. And I found out it's Rod Serling's hometown of Binghamton. It's Binghamton, New York. That's where he made Ape City. And one of the fascinating things is, you know, in Planet of the Apes, when they find the waterfall, they discover water, and they're like, woo, and they jump in the water, right? And then the mute humans steal their clothes. There's a waterfall in Ithaca.
Wow.
And it's huge. It's just, you go a little west of Ithaca College, where Rod Serling taught, and you take a quick turn, and you go up this little road, and it's the most amazing stone basin. The waterfall's got to be like 200 feet. It's just unbelievable. But I think that was the inspiration for that smaller waterfall that they shot, where, you know, they go swimming.
Yeah.
And they find that water. So the whole area, that's Ape City. And what's curious, there are a couple things. In the remake movies that they did with Planet of the Apes, in the first movie, you'll notice that the character that James Franco plays is named Rodman. His last name is Rodman.
Yeah.
And his girlfriend is Caroline, right? Well, if you take the last three letters off of both of those names, you get Rod and Carol. Rod Serling's wife was named Carol.
Yeah, and his daughter is Anne.
Yep. And it's amazing people, amazing people. Jody befriended me over on Facebook. She's super nice. And so that was very interesting. And then the other thing about it is that when you look at the film Planet of the Apes, and I'm going to draw this into Tolkien in just a minute, but if you look at the film Planet of the Apes, you know, that ending is so iconic. But the only way it could have happened is if he was on the East Coast going north.
Right.
So they obviously, when they had their shootout with the apes, then he goes up because the sun is behind him as he's going, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then as he gets there, you see those spikes, and then they reverse angles, and you see what he's looking at.
Right.
The only way that they made that work was by shooting it at the appropriate time with the sunlight to make you understand that he had been traveling north, when in fact on that beach, that beach has been used for a bunch of different things. They did Monkeys episodes there. That beach, that cliff that is behind the statue that you see, where they did the matte painting of the statue, and there's a cliff behind the statue, and you look like you're looking north at the statue.
Yeah.
That cliff, actually, you're facing south, and you're on the west coast. So the director knew that this was the East Coast, and he knew he had to shoot it in such a way that you wouldn't see the shadows, because the shadows would throw you off, and you're thinking, well, because the Statue of Liberty faces south, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And there's a whole other story about Rod Serling's inspiration for that statue scene that I might have mentioned to you, which was a magazine cover of Amazing Stories from that month when he changed it from from a human graveyard to the statue. Yeah. And that there was a cover with a painting of the Statue of Liberty from Amazing Stories. A totally different science fiction story was featured in that magazine the month that he changed the script for Planet of the Apes in 1963.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so clearly he was inspired by that, and that's how he changed it. But the other thing I want to mention is if you look at the Tolkien movies that Peter Jackson did.
Oh, yeah.
So how amazing that was, and they shot it in New Zealand on the other side of the planet, right?
Yep.
So this is one of the things that I got, and the only reason I got it, and like if you're talking about locations and stuff like that, like Vancouver and things like that, to draw it back to X-Files and being able to tell it's Vancouver and stuff like that, is so when I went to Australia, I got all mixed up, because when you're looking at the sun here in the northern hemisphere, you're generally facing south.
Right.
So east is that way and west is that way, right?
Yeah.
So that's south, west, east, north, right? But in Australia, I was always backwards, because when you're seeing the sun in Australia, that's north.
Right.
So east is that way and west is that way.
Yeah.
And it's really disorienting. Like I would go running and I would kind of get lost. I'm like, wait. I would have to. Yeah, it was really weird. Wow. Well, if you remember the Narnia films, they did those couple Narnia films, but the kids started to get too old. What's interesting is they shot those in New Zealand too, in a lot of the same locations as the Tolkien films. Oh. And as you know, in the Narnia films, the witch is coming from the north, coming down.
Right.
Right? She's got the ice and all this stuff. She's coming from the north, right? They didn't do it right. The shadows are wrong. The shadows are backwards. Yeah, right. The shadows, they should have flipped it. Anybody watches the movies, you can tell that they shot it in the southern hemisphere, because they didn't think of where the shadows were going to be, that the enemy was coming from the north.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy when you think of these things and stuff. It's really fascinating. But anyway, and Chris, just to let you know, so you know a ton about aliens, the whole thing with aliens, Blade Runner,
Oh, yeah.
And you're probably aware, and I don't know if I think we might have spoken about this, but so in the DVD or Blu-ray or something for, I think it's Aliens, they mentioned the Watani Corporation guy, right?
Oh, Bishop.
Wayland Utani.
Yeah.
And they were two guys and stuff like that. Well, in the bio for Wayland, the Wayland Corporation, and he is later in Prometheus and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
That Wayland guy in the bio on the DVD, you probably know about this. Ridley Scott or whoever was behind the DVD version of it, they were able to put into it that he was an apprentice to Tyrell of the Tyrell Corporation from Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And what's wild, I might have mentioned this to you. I think I called up the photo or something like that. But Kolchak has a story called Mr. Ring, R-I-N-G.
Yeah.
And it's about the series of murders of these military people out west. And they're all getting just ripped to shreds. And so Kolchak investigates, and he discovers it's a robot. It's an android.
Right.
And the woman who programmed him started to give him ethics and philosophy, and he was getting confused because he was programmed to be a killing machine.
That's right.
And so he turns on the people who were making him a killing machine and starts to kill them.
Right.
And the place where they developed him, and you can see it as Kolchak pulls in with his yellow Mustang, is the Tyrell Institute.
That's right.
So I looked in it because I was like, well, maybe David Chase wrote that script. I don't think he did. And I thought maybe David Chase was friends with the Peoples. You know, it was a husband and wife team who wrote most of the script for Blade Runner, I think.
Yeah, they would later on go on to replace Sam Hamm on Tim Burton's Batman 2 that became Batman Returns.
That's right. Right.
I think they were Janet and something Peoples.
Yeah,
Janet was
Peoples,
the woman.
I think it was.
David Peoples.
Yeah, and they did a bunch of TV work too, and I think they were involved with Blade Runner 2049, which is phenomenal. I think he was like a story advisor for it or something to keep the continuity.
They were a married screenwriting team for a long time.
Oh, yeah. Great stuff. So I just think it's so cool. You know, again, it's fantasy, it's escapism. I was talking with David Knight, about how, you know, as you start to look at it as a profession, you realize what's important in life is family and your associations with friends. All the rest of it passes. But there is something to the lessons that we can get out of these things. And I think looking at the efforts of some of these writers or the producers, or even some of the really good actors who went out of their way. We'll be back with more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
This hour of Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash Digital Cash. Dash is the cryptocurrency designed to be used for spending. In addition to being one of the world's first cryptocurrencies, Dash was the first crypto project to have a decentralized autonomous organization that to this day continues to improve and promote Dash. Every month, 10% of the mining rewards go into a treasury. Anyone with one Dash to spend can put forward a proposal to the Dash masternodes. The masternodes vet the proposals and decide which ones move forward and are funded by that treasury. Nowadays, DAOs are plentiful, but Dash paved the way by doing it first, nearly a decade ago. Dash is one of the oldest cryptocurrencies and is widely available on exchanges, including the decentralized Maya protocol, and in multi-crypto wallets. It's easy to get and use Dash. Start by learning more at dash.org. Thanks to the Dash DAO for sending us 32 Dash per month to promote Dash on the air. Visit dash.org to learn about Dash. Dash.org.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Caroline Malone. US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden are visiting the state of Maine following the most deadly gun massacre in the nation this year. 18 people were murdered and others were injured on October 25th when an Army reservist with known mental health problems attacked people apparently randomly in a bowling alley and bar. Biden is paying respects to the victims and grieving family and community members. On Air Force One on the way over, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said the president supports further action by Congress now.
The president has taken historic action over the last 2.5 years to end the gun violence epidemic tearing our nation apart. Congress has a responsibility too. They must pass on an assault weapons ban. They must enact universal background checks, require safe storage, and end immunity from liability for manufacturers. Congress has the power to ensure an event like this does not happen again. The time is now to act.
Former US President Donald Trump's son, Eric, has taken to the stand for a second day in a trial that could cripple the family business. Eric Trump has again denied any involvement in inflating financial documents to win more favourable terms from insurers and lenders. Jody Jacobs reports from New York.
Eric Trump says he's been relying on company accountants and lawyers to verify the business financial documents and maintains he knew nothing. But when faced with evidence during his cross-examination, emails that showed he signed off on documents that estimated the value of properties, he continued saying he counted on others to ensure those estimates were accurate. He told the court that he does not recall many of the interactions as he was involved at times on other aspects of the business. The judge has already ruled that Trump and his company fraudulently inflated the assets, and the trial is largely about what penalty they should face. Donald Trump is expected to testify on Monday, already denying any wrongdoing. Jody Jacobs, New York.
At least 5 people have died after devastating floods in central Italy. Storm Ciarán hit the country on Thursday night after leaving behind a trail of destruction in the UK, France, and other parts of Western Europe. Italy correspondent Giles Gibson has more.
The regional governor of Tuscany said it had been a long and complex night for search and rescue teams who used rubber boats to evacuate people from their homes in the pitch black. As dawn arrived, revealing the extent of the damage from the rising waters, local authorities also declared a state of emergency. In a statement, the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed her deep condolences for the victims' families and said she's keeping in constant touch with local authorities and emergency teams on the ground. Giles Gibson, Rome.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FS.
Got Telegram? You can follow our channel there and discuss show prep with other listeners at telegram.freetalklive.com.
We return with the final segment of Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Thanks very much for listening, everybody, and thank you for your positive words after we joined you last week on Free Talk Live. We're going to join our guest, Chris Graves, in just a moment, and I want to let you know that this hour of Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash, Digital Cash. Dash is the cryptocurrency designed to be used for spending. Tired of the ever-inflating U.S. dollar? You can live your life on Dash instead with some handy websites. BitRefill.com has been accepting Dash for years and has a ton of big-name retailers and brands, including grocers, gas stations, phone refills, Amazon, and even prepaid MasterCards. Plus, many of their gift cards are available at a discount. What about paying your bills? Spritz.finance can do that, and they can send dollars to your bank account in case you still need those for some reason. Dash is one of the oldest cryptocurrencies and is widely available on exchanges, including the decentralized Maya protocol and in multi-crypto wallets. It's easy to get and use Dash. Start by learning more at dash.org. Thanks to Dash, DAO, for sending us 32 Dash per month to promote Dash on the air. Visit dash.org to learn about Dash. Dash.org. And now our final segment for Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live with our guest known as the Mastodon of Research. You can find him on Rumble at Digging Chris Graves as we round up our conversation about mysteries, entertainment, legends, and lore. Whether it's a musician or it's a carpenter or whatever, you know, they really put their heart and soul into something. And that's what I get out of Darren McGavin's work for Night Stalker. Like, he was the pillar on that show, you know?
He's a great actor, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if I told you, we lived in Westport, Connecticut, and he lived there too. And I guess he knew my father. And my dad said that they were at a party one time, and he was very upset. He was not a fan of government, which you can tell from the Night Stalker.
Yeah.
And he was really upset because he had gone to do an expansion on his porch, and the zoning people wouldn't let him do it, or they were gonna like punish him for having done it without permission or something. We had a similar thing in my town.
On his own property.
Yeah, on his own property. He's like, wow, you know, so it was pretty interesting. And Paul Newman and Linda Blair lived in Westport too. And my sister and my brother were talking about Paul Newman's kids. I think my sister actually went to their house a couple times.
Yeah, Paul Newman had like a barn where people that would do work for his charity, they'd usually get an invite to go and talk with Paul in his barn. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, I guess he was a super nice guy. They just said he was a really
by all
good dude.
accounts, yeah. Great actor.
Yeah. Oh man, I wish I could have been on the racing teams, you know, working on those engines and stuff. That would have been fun. But look, man, I know it's 9:00. We've been rolling, and you've been around for a long time, dude. And I know you got so many things. You probably haven't even eaten dinner yet. Let me get your favorite candy, man. What was the favorite candy?
Candy corn. Can't go wrong.
Candy corn. Can't go wrong. Would you put it on ice cream too? Would that be a good combo sometimes?
You know what? I never thought to do that, but I wouldn't throw it away.
Oh, so good. So good. And scariest movie for you?
Jaws? Well, I'd probably say probably the Joy Luck Club. or Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit. There you go.
Well, for me, I saw Jaws. I think I was 11, and it
Jaws
freaked
is
me
up
out.
there. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one. And Duel on TV,
Oh,
the original.
yeah. How can
And
I
you mentioned
forget that?
Trilogy. You mentioned Trilogy. Trilogy of Terror was king god epic, super scary.
I'll tell you this, Guard. The one that turned my life around, and I'd say for the better in terms of wanting to be a filmmaker or a storyteller or even an actor, was Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street.
I have to see that. And you mentioned that it's got all these depth and levels to it that
It's got all kinds of subtext, and it's just a good spooky campfire story at its heart. You know, a guy that can get you in your dreams. Everyone, like the ocean, Guard, like in Jaws, everyone's got to sleep. So it's a universal concept. Wes Craven was onto something there.
Oh man, and I'll mention again. Excuse me, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. The first was great too.
Yeah.
And that later one that they did on the Army base, that was good too. That was a good one.
There's a few iterations of that. Yeah.
Yeah, they did 4, and then the last one was the woman, the Aussie girl whose father was like involved with some weird stuff. What's her name? She's married to the rocker and was formerly married to Tom.
Nicole
Kidman. Yeah, I didn't watch that one. I didn't. Yeah. But and then Wicker Man, I enjoyed.
1973.
Yeah, and did you ever hear the story Christopher Lee mentioned that there's a bunch of Wicker Man stuff that got lost, and it's probably under one of the M4 or M3s or something like that?
I have heard that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
amazing stuff. And of course, so many of the Hammer horror films, the Quatermass films, amazing stories.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about Alan Quatermass?
Oh, so good. Not Alan Quarterman or whatever from the H. Rider Haggard, Alan Quatermain.
I'm getting it all mixed up. Yeah.
But no, these were the Quatermass stories. They had Quatermass in the Pit, Quatermass Experiment, and another one, and they were Hammer, and they were super cool. They were really, really cool. Nigel Neal was the writer.
Yes.
And if you're familiar with the BBC version of 1984 with Peter Cushing, that's available free on YouTube.
Yeah.
Nigel Neal was, I think, the writer. I don't know if he directed that, but he was the scriptwriter for that adaptation of 1984. Very good adaptation.
Nigel Neal and John Carpenter, the filmmaker John Carpenter, had like this huge brawl because John Carpenter being the executive producer of Halloween 3.
Yeah.
Actually contracted Nigel to write the screenplay because John and Deborah Hill, they both didn't want to write the third one because they had written the first two.
Yeah.
And there was this kind of maybe not legendary because only fanatics like myself really know about it, but they had this huge Nigel apparently was a very by what John Carpenter says, was kind of a grumpy individual.
Interesting
for the most part, but I love both their work, so it's weird seeing those forces collide.
Oh man, I gotta go back. I have not taken a lot of time. I just started watching another rerun from Hawaii 5-0, and there's another show where Jack Lord ended up shouldering the last few years of that show just basically on his own, keeping it going. And what a great job he did. I mean. Some of these people, they just the work that they would do and the exactitude. You look at Tom Baker from Doctor Who. He knew every nuance of the scripts, and he was very, very exacting on the shows that, the doctor would only do this or only do that. And ever since then, the actors are like, well, he was right. He was absolutely right. Philip Hinchcliffe and those writers, Terry Nation, Terrence Dix, Robert Holmes, they were just, the golden age. Barry Letts during John Pertwee's era and John Pertwee, amazing, amazing people all involved in that era of Doctor Who. Great stuff.
You know who loved Jack Lord? The late singer for Alice in Chains, Lane Staley.
Really?
He liked him because, when the musicians would choose a name for the publishing and everything?
Yeah.
Usually you'd see it in the liner notes. Well, Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell, for the most part, would write most of Alice in Chains' music together, or sometimes Jerry would write more of the musical stuff. But every time I would see Lane Staley's publishing company name, in the liner notes, it was Jack Lord Music. I always got a kick out of that.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
And, again, it is weird because... these people receive so much of our attention, and it is weird. The guy who's out there, raising turkeys for Thanksgiving might get some, local familiarity with people and stuff like that. So I try to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But there's something very enthralling and exciting and fun about these stories, especially if the stories pack a surprise, they entertain you, and they can give you value,
It's Twilight Zone right there.
Yeah.
Ahead of the time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Chris, thank you. Okay, Tom is in the house. He says, thanks, Gard and Chris, for the cool show. God bless. Stay safe out there and enjoy the rest of your night. Brian Deb says, watched Wicker Man. Yeah, the original is very cool. And final thing, did you get to see Nicolas Cage's version of
I was going to say, and James
not Wicker Man, though. Not Wicker Man.
Okay.
Yeah, I know people. Oh, the bees.
I saw that one, yeah.
I haven't seen it, but he did a version of Color Out of Space.
That I thought would make for a great motion picture a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they went and made it, and I still need to check it out. I think it was released during the pandemic, so it wasn't in theaters. Yeah. But some trusted friends of mine, they weren't too enthused by it, but I don't know what to make of that.
I'll say this. If you listen to Tales to Terrify, if you go to Tales to Terrify, just look up Color Out of Space, Tales to Terrify. Okay. There was the host of Tales to Terrify, Tony was his name. He passed away. He did a version, just reading the story, and it is superb.
Well, for those out there that are not familiar with what Gard's were talking about, it's a great, one of H.P. Lovecraft's greatest stories, in my opinion. And the concept is something that I've been fascinated with for, forever. The idea of what would happen if all of a sudden you saw a brand new color and your eye could actually see it. And what would that do? And could it be extraterrestrial in nature? Right. Not to give anything away, but could it be out of this world, so to speak?
Yeah.
Am I giving it justice with that?
Oh yeah, it's great, and it's a color you can't describe. In that Lovecraftian, Cthulhu-esque sort of thing. That's right. And you nailed it. You nailed it. And what's really interesting is so you know how Lovecraft. We're coming right back to Salem.
Yeah,
Lovecraft's Arkham.
Danvers Hospital, State Hospital was
and Arkham is loosely based on Salem in that area, Peabody, Salem, but mostly Salem. Yeah. And what's really interesting is, as you know, Arkham is the only place where the Marvel and DC universes cross.
Okay, now you're telling me something that I don't know at all, and you're blowing my mind right now, because I just know it as the number one place for all of my favorite heroes, villains, Batman, Arkham Asylum. Now, how is Marvel cross?
Oh, Marvel has an Arkham Asylum. They both have Arkham Asylum. That's where there's a crossover.
Really?
They both have an Arkham Asylum. And in fact, Cletus Cassidy is, I believe that's where Cletus gets
You're talking about Carnage? You're talking about Carnage, Cletus Cassidy?
Yeah, Carnage, exactly. Okay. That's where Cletus Cassidy, I believe he becomes infected by the symbiote that's infected Venom.
Venom.
Because what's his name? Who is Venom?
Eddie
is
Brock.
In there. Yeah. So he's put in there for a little while, and he's in a cell like next to Cletus Cassidy, who's a much crazier homicidal. Yeah. And it's in Arkham Asylum.
That is Arkham Marvel. Yeah. I gotta turn in my geek card, because I've never heard of Marvel. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I've never heard them. The Marvel universe. Arkham.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if it's when they created Carnage, but it's close to it. Right. There's a Marvel graphic novel that combines most of those issues where they have
like an omnibus kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's like an oversized paperback, and it's great. And it happened in the 90s, just around the time that Siamese Dream was released by Smashing Pumpkins. Yeah. And in the blocks, Cletus Cassidy is screaming, "Let me out, let me out." And they do it let me out. And it goes, and you're like, oh man, this has got to be a reference to Smashing Pumpkins. It's got to be, right?
And they would be on the Batman and Robin soundtrack.
Yeah. It's super cool. So, but what's interesting is bringing back to Color Out of Space.
Yeah.
The main character in Color Out of Space, his last name is Gardner.
Oh.
So, yeah, Lovecraft knew enough to know that the Gardner family was very, he might not have known that they helped found Salem, but he knew that the Gardner family was very big in Salem. So Lovecraft used the Gardner last name as the main character for the family that owns the farm that gets this color on it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So check it out. If you get a chance, I'll see if I can find the link for you, Chris.
Yeah.
I'll post it on Twitter, too, for the audience. It's a fantastic reading. And by the way, the reading done by this former host of Santoro was his name. He passed away from cancer. But Tales to Terrify, they got tons of great stories. Joe Lansdale, God of the Razor, is in there.
Oh, I interviewed him, too. Yeah.
Yes, that was a fantastic. Joe's a friend of mine. He's such a good guy.
Yeah,
he's a good dude.
His daughter's very talented too.
Oh yeah, amazing. And she's great country singer. And
I derailed. We're all over the place.
No, but yeah. So it's very interesting because let me see if I can call up the Tales to Terrify website.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can call it up for you. And there's one other thing. There's a story called Triumph by a guy who came over from Croatia.
Yeah.
His name is Damir Salkovic. And it's like an alternate World War II history thing of the Nazis and their weird occult searches for talismans and stuff.
Oh, like the Vril Society?
Yeah, the total Vril stuff. Wow. Exactly. Yeah. And yep, like that stuff that Sapir wrote about. And so here's the Tales to Terrify website. And they've got all sorts of stuff in there. I mean, just amazing stories. So good. And if you do a search for Damir, I'll post that one on Twitter too. But if you do a search, it's Tony, I think it's Tony Santoro was his name. He passed away. But what's curious about it, Chris, again, bringing it back home.
Yeah.
Santoro, who was the original host of Tales to Terrify, I found out that he was living out somewhere in like the Midwest or whatever when he was doing the show, or maybe in Connecticut or something. I can't remember. Not the same thing, but I found out that he actually lived where I went to high school in Milford, New Hampshire, and he was the director of numerous plays at a place called the American Stage Festival, where during the summertime, it was a summer stock theater thing. Yeah. A lot of the New York Broadway and off-Broadway actors would come up to do summer stock there. I saw Gaslight there, and I think he directed it when I was a kid.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
It is, yeah. Small world.
Yeah. I was like, what the heck, man? Like I contacted him because I wanted to get in touch with Damir Salkovic, and he wrote back. He was so nice. Yeah. He contacted Damir. Damir contacted me, sent me a PDF of the story, and he's like, oh, I see on your thing you're in Amherst, New Hampshire. I worked at the American Stage Festival in Milford. I was a director there. I'm like, whoa, man.
Wow.
It was, super, super cool. So anyway, I'll send you the links, dude. Okay. And thank you. Oh, and we have some donations over at Rockfin. So I want to just get in there because I probably missed a bunch of things. And we got to start doing this on YouTube, man. Audi Tip 20 says cops are low IQ order followers who scoff at the Constitution, from earlier in the program. Yep. From Ian Freeman to this mystic shop owner. Yes, Audi. Bang on, man. Andromeda 1. Oh, there's a great movie, The Andromeda Strain.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, man, that's so intense at the end. I saw The Cult Saturday night at the Palms Hotel here in Vegas. They rocked. Dude, I hope they did The Witch. Dude, yes.
I only saw them once, and it was at River Rave at Foxborough Stadium in like 2002 or something.
I hope was it good?
Yeah, they were pretty cool. Yeah,
they're good, man. And that whole thing, Ian Astbury connecting with the Native American influence when he was in school because he felt like an outcast because he came from England. He had the accent in Canada, so he was sort of pushed away. He became friends with a lot of the Indian kids. That's way cool. That's so cool. MJ Nichols, MJ, thanks for putting the show together tonight, Guard, and for getting CG back on. Can't think of better Halloween mind meld.
Yeah.
Yes. Patrick S. tipped, I like chicken. And then there's Max B. Did Bizarro Guard get sent on a did we send Bizarro Guard on a candy run? Yeah, he'll have to come back. That'll be cool.
Yeah.
And Real McCoy's sent a tip as well. You guys are all amazing. And so final thoughts on the Rockfin chat, for final thoughts on candy and stuff like that. And then Chris, I better let you go. Also at Rumble, same thing. We get Risha M saying, awesome show. Thanks, Chris. That was awesome. Chris Graves, everybody, get over to Rumble, hit that like, hit the follow, spread the shows that are out there, especially that Jack the Ripper show. And by the way, talking about Jack, Jack, the podcaster, who recently had
Jack Allen. He had a
Jack
child.
Allen. God bless Jack Allen and his wife. Their baby is doing great, I hear.
Yeah.
And he just did a pod about a book that he read about Aleister Crowley. It was fascinating.
He did. I was watching some of that. Yeah, no, I've had him on Digging for a couple of times, and he was gracious enough to have me on Kojak. That's the initials for Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence.
Yes, I remember that. It was amazing. You guys, we got to do more of this. This is so good. Northern Cardinal says good night to some people. Spooktacular show, boys. Thanks for being our guest tonight, Chris Ghostly Graves.
I just wish my camera was working.
Chris, I got to tell you, you've been going through so much stuff. And don't ever forget the power that you represent. And, I know when you're by yourself and you don't feel good. And, saying this publicly is important, I think, for a number of other people. You're showing great power. And thanks, man, because you've done great stuff for people you never even are going to meet. So kudos, man. And we're going to continue our Tales to Terrify in the future. And you're going to be in an anthology that Liberty Conspiracy Publishing puts out. I know.
Oh, thank you.
You got it. Oh, dude, it's going to be great. So, all right, folks, we're going to say farewell. Chris Graves is going to check out. Chris, final thoughts. Where can they find your stuff? I'll start calling things up on the web here.
Well, I'll make it nice and short. I had to I did a Rumble page that Guard was nice enough to put up on the screen. That's under the page Digging Chris Graves. That has the show with Peter as well, which is Don't Take Our Word for It, which we're gonna have. I'm not sure you're familiar with an author by the name of Joseph Farrell. Have you ever heard of Joseph Farrell? He does a bunch of work on like 9/11 and JFK and pyramids.
I think that's maybe where I've heard. I don't know him.
Yeah, he's been on I Protest with Donald recently.
Oh yeah. Okay, right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So him and Peter are pretty tight when it comes to researching stuff back and forth. So I'd like to talk to him on our Don't Take Our Word for It show about some of his 9/11 work that he's done. But other than that, I'm just trying. Actually, the moment I part ways with you, Guard, I'm going to have Franco Mattei, our good friend, and Mr. Jason Barker. If I can get this camera to work, we're going to try to do another test live stream of my StreamYard.
Oh, nice.
So we're going to do that, and that'll go right to that Digging Chris Graves Rumble page. Hopefully I set it up right, and to my Twitter feed. And Twitter feed, I guess, is the most important. And you have it right there. Thank you, sir. Okay.
There you go, man.
That's it. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so, and people can start watching that then. If will it go out or will it be private? It'll go out?
Oh, it'll go out live. Everything will be a live stream from here on.
All right.
I have all of the content I was able to save or back up. I've been uploading to this page on Rumble. So
you are the Rumble fish right there, man.
Rumble fish, Francis Ford Coppola, 1983, 82.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Chris, thank you. I've kept you so much longer than I ever anticipated.
I love the heck out of this, man.
I love you, man. You're just the man.
You too, brother.
Yeah, you're awesome. So good vibes, lots of prayers for you.
Thank
and
you as well.
Yeah, you got it. While I put on my dinner, I'll be checking things out. I hope people go to your Twitter handle is at @CGravesMassGuy. At @CGravesMassGuy for people listening after the fact. And if you're listening later on the Free Talk Live broadcasts on Friday.
Yeah.
And also, we've got your Rumble is digging Chris Graves, right?
Yeah, that's the official channel. Yeah, I'm not sure why the link has it as the weird numbers and all that. I don't know, but
All
yeah,
right.
it's digging Chris Graves. You just type it in there.
All right, buddy. Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
On Free Talk Live, we're bringing people to the ideas of liberty every day. From wrestling superstars like Glenn Jacobs.
You guys really are having an impact, I believe. Like I said, a lot of where I am now is due to listening to Free Talk Live. You changed my mind on some very important issues years ago.
To random people tuning in on the radio.
I was kind of stuck in the left-right paradigm. I heard your show by chance on a Saturday night. From there, I went on, joined the Free State Project, and become an amplifier. So, I mean, that's really the reason